for us on development. Some of this is when I did some rounding meetings, just things that came up that we'd like to learn more about, as well as other questions maybe we've had. Plus, there'll be a chance for you to ask questions at the end. So I guess with that, I'll let you guys do any introduction of yourselves that you want to do, and we can go from there. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Jenny. Yep, we're going to do that. Again, as Jenny said, I'm Cheryl Gullicksrud, and my career history was 30 years in Mondovi, so not too far away. Still live in a little town called Oliva, which some of you will know. So I had a little shorter drive than Scott when he introduces himself here. But yeah, I started out teaching there. In my last 10 years, I was the superintendent, and then I went to CISA 4 for 5 years, so that's kind of my background. And excited to be a part of WSB and coming around and helping boards like you that are interested in learning some new things and helping you to be better at your job. So tonight's meeting, we're going to look at some board meeting procedures, and then as a governance team, some roles and responsibilities. So here's our agenda. I'm going to go through a little bit of purpose and goals. And then my first part of the session is to give you a little bit about research that was done on effective school boards, some characteristics there. Then I'm going to turn it over to Scott, and he hopefully will be able to answer all the questions you have related to open meetings law, the closed session rules of order, and then public comment and how to handle those pieces. And a little bit of social media guidelines. We're kind of looking for a little guidance from you on specific questions on that part. Okay? And then come back to me a little bit about board and superintendent responsibilities and working together to build a team. And then hopefully a little time at the end just to think about your next steps and what you'd like to do next. Okay? And the train track is up here for a reason. Because yes, we have this agenda planned for you, but this is your meeting. So if we need to divert and take a sidetrack because you have a specific question that you would like to get into, remember that yes, please just let us know what sidetrack you'd like to take, and we'll do our best within the time frame we have, and we'll make this as beneficial to you as we possibly can. Okay? So our goals to help you learn about laws regarding board meetings, some guidelines, understanding of your roles and responsibilities, and then next steps in your own governance and what you'd like to do. So a little bit of introduction here. I'm going to give you a couple minutes to think while I let Scott introduce and give you a little background about him. But what I'm looking for is how long you've been serving on the board, so a little knowledge for us on how much experience you've had, and a couple of faces I've seen for several years, so I know that you've been around for a while. And then looking at your experience with any other boards, like a church board or an athletic group that you're in town, or the Lions Club, or 4-H. If you're on any other boards or have had any experience on other boards, just to give an idea of getting you to think about how you manage those meetings too and how it worked to be a team member there. So. Okay, I'll let Scott start, and then I'll let either Alan or Chrissy decide who gets to pick.
All right, I'm Scott Mikic. I'm one of the attorneys with WASB. Started with WASB right after law school back in 2004, and was with them up till 2011 doing collective bargaining and representing districts through that process. Went back to my original home state of Iowa for a couple years and was the executive director for human resources for the Des Moines Public School District for about 2 years, and then decided liked Wisconsin better than Iowa, and ended up coming back. Surprising, yeah. Ended up coming back to Wisconsin, and I was in-house legal and human resources, kind of a 50-50 split for the Kaukauna School District over by Green Bay. And then WSB called about 3 years ago and asked if I was interested in coming back working from home. So I've actually been working from home up in the Green Bay area even pre-COVID. I was in my basement office, so doing any kind of legal work, policy work, presentations to schools, and that's me in a nutshell. So, and one of the last slides has all my information too, as far as contact information and all that stuff. So during the presentation, if anything comes up that you have a question on, you want to follow up, send me an email, give me a call. All of that information is on one of the last slides. it's up to you guys.
All right. Yes, so you should have packet in front of you of all the slides, so, and there's spots there to take notes. So they're your working papers, so that you can jot down anything that you'd like to check with Scott about later, or give me a call about too. So, anyone like to start with an introduction first?
I'll start.
Okay, thank you, Chrissy.
My name is Chrissy. This is my second term on the school board. I had a couple years in between, so this is just the beginning of my second term.
Okay. Any other experience with other boards or groups, leadership groups?
Nope, just this lovely group here.
All right, wonderful. Cedric.
Hi, Cedric Betcher. Been on, let's see, this is my 11th term, 32nd year. So I've also served 30-plus years on church boards, various church boards. Been on the Holstein Breeders Board, Dairy Herd Program Board. I don't know, maybe some more, so I'm forgetting about, so that's about it.
Well, I'm just a puppy.
So lots of meetings.
Oh, yeah. Thousands.
A lot of good background there.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's been good.
All right, thank you. Corey.
Corey the new, I'm the new guy, so first
Okay,
year.
welcome.
Served on the Cadet Community Association board for several years. They took over for the chamber, also the chair for my township, and by extension, on the Cornell Fire Department chair as well.
Okay, thank you. Fred.
I've been 2.5 years, and other boards. I've been on a wrestling club board, and I'm, I guess, plant manager of a R&D facility, so some leadership type stuff.
Leadership management pieces, sure. Thank you. Becca.
Hi, I'm Becca. This is my second year. And I also, before being on the school board, was on the our parent organization through mainly the elementary school, but yeah, for this district.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Donna.
This is my 9th year on the board. I am also the treasurer for the Board of Control for CISA 10. I'm on the WASB Policy and Resolution Committee, which has proved to be interesting.
Okay, this year, yes.
Yeah.
I am the program director for Come Now and Eat, the community food programs, community table, backpack buddies for the school district, and run the pop-up food pantries. And I'm serving, as Cedric likes, will chuckle, I'm on the call committee for church, having our umpteen meeting tomorrow night.
That?
We'll pray for you.
Yeah. Just find somebody.
Those could be learning experiences.
Oh, yeah.
Understood from the past.
I've learned a lot.
Well, thank you for all of that. Ellen.
I've been on the board the same amount of time as Brad, 2.5 years. I guess I'm a supervisor, been a supervisor at my glass making facility for 11 years. Also serve on the land use committee, which just doesn't do much for our little tiny township of Edson. But that's about it for me, I guess.
Well, my husband's on the town board too, and a little town board, so I can relate to some of those meetings and conversations. And so Jenny, we're not gonna leave you out.
Okay. I'm Jenny. This is my 4th year here in Cadet.
Okay.
Prior to that, I was in Chippewa Falls as a curriculum director. I've lived in this community for 30-plus years. This is the school that my own kids went to, and so in that era, I was involved more in 4-H and those kinds of things.
Yeah, so a lot of history tied here too. So a lot of experience from a lot of places. And my summarizing comment to that is everybody brings that to the table. Sometimes you don't always think about that, but your past experiences with being on boards do play a role. And don't be afraid to call on some of those experiences, because it's still all group work and how you work well together. So thank you for participating with that. That helps both Scott and I understand, some boards that we're with, they're all new people, and some boards, many of them have been there many years. You have a mix here. So, all right. I'm gonna start with a little bit of background on effective school governance. And Donna and Cedric in particular, you've probably heard some of this stuff before. It comes down to research that was done in Iowa. Started out with some studies there with someone trying to say, what actually does a good school board do to help with student achievement? Okay, and what they found out is how well boards carry out their governance does have an impact on student achievement. And when that Iowa Lighthouse study was done, it was followed up by the Center for Public Education, which found the same general results. There are some key characteristics that school districts that are governed by boards that do specific kinds of things, maybe not do the whole list, but they do focus on some things, that the students traditionally achieve better. So that, sometimes it feels like as a board member, maybe you have this indirect, you really don't know how much your decisions and discussions here impact, but they do, and that's what the research found out. And what evolved from all of that is there's something called the key work of school boards. And I'll get my copy out. I brought them, I forgot to lay it out. It's in like it's at least second edition. But the key work of school boards is a whole nother workshop, so I'm just gonna go through the key areas. I'm gonna back up. So starts out with vision, accountability, policy, community, leadership, and relationships. And the two that we're gonna spend more time tonight are the community part and relationships. But boards in high achieving districts exhibit habits and characteristics that are markedly different from boards in low achieving districts. That's a quote out of the key work of school boards. So there is research to back up these things. If you want student success, there's teamwork amongst the board. There's our star with all our components. And I'm just briefly going to touch each one and give you a little taste, and then I'm going to turn it over to get to the meat of the meeting tonight with some of the things that you specifically asked for. But vision, if you don't know where you're going, any road will get there. So those high achieving districts had conversations about a vision, made their plan, and then evaluated it constantly to see if they were making their goal. Effective school boards establish clear vision, high expectations for teaching and learning that support the student outcomes. And that's what they focus their conversations about, is the high achievement for their students, their goal. Second part, accountability. It's one thing to create your vision, doesn't get you where you want to go if you don't stop and periodically look at, are we making progress? Are there things we could be doing differently? So accountability is the second phase on that key works of school boards. The important piece to that is not only doing the checking, but then being transparent and communicating, good and bad, how progress is coming and keeping those connections with the people in your community. Here's our vision, and here's what we're doing and how we're doing. Accountability. Your job as school board members, number one is the high academic standards, being transparent, efficient, making sure efficient and effective operations, and then a commitment to that continuous improvement. Third cog in the key work of school boards has to do with policy. Do you use Neola here? Oh, okay, yay, okay. Because policy is one of those things that can get way out and ahead of you as laws and things change, and trying to keep up with it is really hard. And Neola really does, or companies like it, do a nice job of helping you. Because when you have that vision and you have that accountability and you're checking along as you go, policy is what keeps you in your lanes and moving and helps you keep focused. So when things come up, questions come up, go back to policy and say, that's been discussed and decided, we can move on to this next piece. So it's kind of the glue that keeps everybody going and moving forward. Community leadership. This quote kind of summarizes everything. Community is much more than belonging to something. It's about doing something together that makes belonging matter. So when you're talking to community and sharing and being transparent, it's getting that feedback back so that the community feels that their opinions and their suggestions and that they're a part of it also. Okay? So community leadership, it's involving and listening, and that's an important piece of helping your school district be successful also. And again, each of these parts could be a half-hour discussion, I just wanted to get your mindset into the 5 areas that are important and how we're gonna focus on the 2 tonight. So effective boards make deliberate ongoing efforts to establish and maintain processes that actively seek out the community's voice, and then enlist commitment. Have the community be involved in what you're working on. And the last one, which is why you're here tonight, the governance team relationships. How can we serve most effectively? And having your meetings run effectively and efficiently is huge in terms of getting the work done that you need to get done. So, not a lot of text here because united we stand, divided we fall. And so our goal is to make sure that you're able to stay united and focused and moving forward. It doesn't mean that you're always going to agree. It's just that there's a format and a structure for having those discussions and everybody being able to have their voice heard and having a productive decision. And we'll come back at the end and we'll talk a little bit about that team development piece and handling those conversations where there's disagreement. That's a natural, normal part. If you think about any of the other groups that you're a part of, I'm sure not everybody always agrees on those either. Even within a household with 2 people, don't always agree. So conflict is a normal part of life. It's how we handle it and use it as an opportunity that's important. So again, united we stand, but divided, fractioned out, not so productive. So with that, again, I just wanted to kind of give you a little bit of a pat on the back for you are doing what the research says is the best productive thing to do, is learn as a board and make yourselves as a high functioning team. So thank you for your participation, and with that, I will let Scott get into all those questions that you had.
Yeah, and as far as questions, just to piggyback off that, if you have any questions that come up as I'm going along, if I gloss over anything or if I skip some slides, because we've got maybe, 100 slides for a 2-hour slot. But we wanted to give you the information, so I might skip some slides assuming that you know the content or you've heard the content on the slide. But if it's something that you want to go back to or something that you don't understand, definitely raise your hand and let me know. Some core concepts with regards to the open meetings law, and some of you who've been on the board for a long time probably have heard these things, but the open meetings law applies to meetings of the governmental body, and we'll get into the specifics of what those 2 words exactly mean. But the important thing with regards to the open meetings law is that governmental bodies must give appropriate and timely notice of time, date, place, and subject matter of their meetings. The meetings must be open to the public. They must be accessible to members of the public if there's any disabilities. And I know during COVID, there were issues with regards to virtual meetings and making sure that those were open to the public. If there's going to be a closed session, there's a certain process that a school board has to go through in order to get into a appropriate closed session. And then, of course, there at the bottom, governmental bodies shall not conduct public business outside of the context of a properly noticed meeting, and we'll get into some things like walking quorums and negative quorums, things like that as we go. So definition of governmental body, that includes, of course, a school board, subunit of the school board, committees, those types of things, and sometimes school board members are a little bit surprised with regards to committees, or how does it work if we've got a 3-member committee where there's a couple board members that want to talk about committee business. So committees are covered under the definition of a governmental body. There is an exception for collective bargaining purposes, but most school districts haven't done that too much recently. With regards to the second definition from that first slide, meeting. Meeting is defined in the open meetings law when there is a number of sufficient board members and a purpose to conduct or to talk about school district business. So with regards to numbers, typically if 1/2 or more of the school board or the committee is present, then the numbers requirement is met for purposes of the open meetings law. And then if fewer than 1/2 of the members are present and they could potentially block or defeat something, you could have what's called a negative quorum. And this is something could happen. Let's say you've got a non-renewal for a teacher coming up, and typically you've got a 7-member board, and for whatever reason, maybe one board member has COVID and is out, and another board member is on vacation in April, and so suddenly you've got only 5 board members that are going to be taking action on that non-renewal under the law. The way the vote has to go is it's a majority vote of the full membership of the board, so 4 board members would have to vote in order to have that non-renewal go through. And since there's only 5 board members that are going to be participating in that discussion, that non-renewal discussion, technically 2 board members could constitute a negative quorum, and if those 2 board members are out talking and making decisions, that could be a violation of the open meeting law. So something very fact-specific, doesn't happen all that often, but it certainly could happen if the facts align themselves just right. With regards to purpose, members must be present to conduct governmental business, so discussion about school district business, listening in to an information session that could impact the school, any of those things would generally fall under the purpose requirement for the open meetings law. One of the things that we generally get into some discussion about with school boards when we talk about the open meetings law is walking quorum, emails, things like that. So a walking quorum is a situation where individual board members get together and have a series of gatherings or meetings. Each of those individual meetings is less than a quorum, so typically it's 1 or 2 or maybe even 3 board members that get together and have conversations about governmental business, and there's an agreement prior to the board meeting about how those individual board members should act or are going to act. So that's where the walking quorum comes into play, and essentially when the board meeting actually happens, those board members who have already reached agreement, they just kind of rubber stamp the agreement that they've made outside of the open meeting. So that's where the violation comes into play. Electronic communications is an area where walking quorums can certainly arise if you have a situation where a board member, for example, sends out an email saying, here's how I feel about this particular issue that's in front of the board, here's how I want to vote, here's how I think you guys should vote, and then for whatever reason, one board member forwards that email, and then that gets forwarded and that gets forwarded. Before you know it, all of the board members have kind of been discussing things outside of that open meeting, and that's where the violation of the open meeting law would come into play.
I have some questions.
Yes, jump in.
All right, so a couple scenarios I just want to kind of understand. So in terms of the walking quorum, let's say the school's going to vote on whether we have strawberry milk or chocolate milk.
Mm-hmm.
And I call Christy and I said, hey, I'm going to vote for strawberry milk.
I am too.
All right, and then I call Cedric. So now there's 3 of us, right? As long as I don't go past that, I haven't created a walking quorum. But as soon as I call Brad, now we're in trouble. Is that the definition of the walking quorum?
Yeah, I mean, essentially, as long as you, I would say don't get into it if you can avoid it.
Right.
Because it gives the appearance of an impropriety. But I think technically you could have a situation where, like you said, 2 or 3 board members get together and start having discussions. My concern about that scenario is if the 3 of you get together, maybe Cedric then goes off the reservation and goes rogue and starts having conversations with Becca or Donna, and before you know it, now you've got 4. And that's where the email thing comes into play,
Right.
Like I said, with forwarding emails and replying or replying all. So that's why, from a legal perspective, we say just don't get into those discussions at all if you can avoid it.
Okay, similar question with electronics, strawberry versus chocolate.
Yeah.
I email the entire board and say, I'm voting for strawberry. I will not support chocolate milk. But nobody replies, nothing past that. Is that okay to make your stance known to the entire board prior to the meeting? Or is that something that should happen at the board meeting?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say that it's on its face a violation of the open meetings law. So, you know, there's two questions. The first question that I would say is, number one, is it a violation of the open meetings law if nothing outside of your statement on how you're going to vote happens? So you're telling the rest of the board, this is how I'm going to vote, and everyone says, whoop-de-doo, we don't care how you're gonna vote. You know, please stop sending me these emails. And they just go on with their lives, and then when they get to the board meeting, they have discussion and action like a board is supposed to. The bigger problem, so that's not, I don't think, an open meeting law violation. It raises some questions about, you know, impropriety and, you know, ethics and some of those different things, but I wouldn't say it's necessarily a violation where the district attorney is gonna come in and slap you on the wrist.
The good board ethics is built on trust, and, you know, and I think everybody wants to hear the same thing. So that's why everybody should have that discussion here.
Yeah. And that's why even in different situations where I've advised superintendents about information that goes out to the board, you know, make sure that when you craft that information that you're sending out to the board, that it's worded in a way that, you know, this is just information for you. It's not, I don't want you to take action on it. I don't want you to discuss this with other board members, but this is just something that I feel important that you have information. But yeah, I do get a little bit more concerned when individual board members start having conversations with other individual board members.
Do you have suggestions? Because I've heard sometimes, and I'd say from my perspective, like because sometimes you send information, but then people have questions, and then it starts to be a conversation. You know, I've heard at times if you just blind copy, then it sort of, not that people still can't take the email and send it to everybody, but it makes it, they have to take an extra step, or like how much of that is okay just to answer a question as long as you answer it to everybody if it's not an item that's like an action item?
I would say, so for that question, I've seen individual boards where if one individual board member asks the superintendent a question, that superintendent and that board member feel just fine having a conversation together. I've seen other boards where in policy, which I would agree, which I think is a good idea to put it in policy. The policy says that if an individual board member asks the superintendent a question, that the superintendent will do like a reply all.
Like everybody hears.
So everyone has the same information, but I would say that depending on what your practice is, if you're looking at changing it, that would be something that would be good for policy to say, you know, when Cedric asks you about the budget or, you know, curriculum or whatever it is, that you then do a respond to that email and copy every board member in on it, just as an FYI. If the original piece of information is you saying, FYI board, this is what's going on, got a situation, here's some information, and one of the board members responds back to you with a question, I think there it probably would just be understood that it's a reply all.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think, I was just on what Corey's talking about, the walking quorums, I think one thing that happened with the crazy COVID times, it's not necessarily even, I understand we're not supposed to, but it's a small town, we run into each other at ball games or whatever else, and it's almost like, well, I can't go sit by Chrissy at ball game because we might start talking about something, and it's like, that's where it gets kind of, you know, I mean, or, and it's like, well, that's kind of crazy too, isn't it? I mean, at the same time, like, I can't possibly talk to any of these guys out on board room, I mean, that.
Yeah, and I mean, I if it's a chance encounter, so if you, I don't know if you ever looked at the Attorney General Compliance Guide with regards to the open meetings law, but there is language in there that talks about chance encounters or, you know, birthday parties, the state education convention, if, you know, 2 or 3 or 4 board members drive down together. The goal is for you not to discuss specific school-related business for this school. If you're talking about, you know, general educational matters, Wisconsin education issues, national education issues, I think then the Attorney General would say that's probably okay because you're talking about bigger items. You know, if you and Chrissy bump into each other at a ball game and are sitting there talking about, man, this is a great coach, we really like him. I wouldn't see that as an open meetings law violation, even though technically you're talking about the employment, the maybe
Right.
continued employment
Right.
of a coach in the district. But at the same time, you know, try to avoid conversations. And the rule of thumb is that once you start talking about issues outside of board meetings that are hot topic issues, masking, CRT, closing a school, changing school boundaries, killing the football team or the baseball team, or, you know, whatever sports or arts program that you have in the district that people are going to be concerned about. Definitely don't have those kind of conversations. But if it's just kind of a off-the-wall conversation about, oh, my third grader really loves this particular teacher, and I think your kid had that same teacher a couple years ago, or your kid's gonna have that teacher in a year or two, I think that's okay. I think there are, like you said, limits of reason and reasonableness, especially for small towns. So, moving on then with regards to notices of meetings, presiding officer must ensure that sufficient notice of the meeting is given. Has to be given to the public, to news media outlets or the official newspaper. The question at the bottom is important. Presiding officer has a duty to ensure that proper notice is given for each meeting prior to and during the meeting, whose responsibility is it to continuously evaluate whether appropriate notice was given. So this gets to the situation where, and I've seen it happen at board meetings, sometimes before the board meeting starts, sometimes during that 5 or 10 minutes when a board transitions from open session to closed session. There's just kind of that side conversation about some school business that's going on. So make sure as the board president, you're the board president, right? Okay. So that you would be making sure that the notice goes out and that all the appropriate things are in there. But every board member has a responsibility during the meeting if the conversation goes off the rails a little bit and you guys start talking about something that wasn't properly noticed to the community, that you guys, one of you or everyone says, hey, we should really stop talking about this, we should put it on a future agenda. Does that make sense? And like I said, I have seen that happen many times. I've had to give a little wink and a nod to a superintendent or a board president saying, you know, you guys are kind of, you know, you need to kind of stop things from going any further. I'm gonna skip ahead a little bit. We do get a lot of questions, or I do, and the other attorneys, with regards to the 24-hour notice requirement. There is in the state statutes a 24-hour notice requirement unless for good cause the notice cannot be given with 24-hour notice. And typically the scenario that I throw out when people call about this is you've got a Monday board meeting and someone discovers on Sunday night that a boiler malfunctioned, or there was some other significant issue that happened and no one found out about it until Sunday night. Can we, you know, do an emergency update to our notice and talk about this at our Monday board meeting so that we can get this emergency situation taken care of? I think that would probably be okay. The other one is, well, our administrative assistant forgot to put something on the notice and we just found out about it on Monday morning. Is that okay? Generally speaking, I think I and everyone else at WSB has said that's probably not good cause. That's not to say that other attorneys haven't said, yeah, go ahead and slide it in there, but I know from my experience that that's typically not going to be good cause. But if that situation did come up, I don't know who you guys use for legal counsel, that would be, I'd give Weld a call and just say, hey, here's the situation, here are the specific facts of what's going on. Would you be okay with us doing some kind of less than 24-hour notice? Just some statutory references with regards to the notices of meeting, time, date, place, notice of any contemplated closed session, public comment period if you're going to have one, which most school boards do.
Push that.
Oh,
I just-
there we go.
Thanks.
Whoops, I went too far there. If there's going to be a public comment time, make sure that's in the notice so the community knows that if they show up, they're potentially going to get the opportunity to speak. If there's going to be a closed session and then you are going to come back into open session, make sure that's part of the notice. And then if you're doing any kind of virtual meetings, which it doesn't sound like you're doing anymore, there could be some additional consideration. So if COVID blows up again and there needs to be additional virtual meetings, get in touch with us and we can walk you through all of the stuff that we walked districts through about a year ago. Just trying to see. With regards to the agenda items, the biggest question is going to be the reasonableness of the notice. The rule of thumb there at the bottom is whether or not a random community member, if they looked at your notice, is going to understand what it is that you're going to be talking about as a board. So if the board, for example, is going to be considering permanently closing an elementary school, just having your meeting notice say facilities planning probably is not going to be sufficient. It's going to do a nice job of not getting a lot of community members at the meeting, which you may not want to have a ton of people there to talk about a hot topic item like that. But you definitely would want to have a much more specific notice there. Just like the next one, if you're talking about a $20,000 salary increase for an administrator, just putting closed session personnel and then the statute would probably not be enough. The board is looking at attendance boundaries, and there you can see the recommended notice based on the specificity requirement that I just talked about. Some examples, this goes back to COVID and DPI waivers and things like that, so I'll skip that one. Closed session topics with regards to closed session, you have to indicate what the closed session statutory exemption is under 1985, and then you also have to not just list the number and the letter, you also need to identify what is going to be talked about. So there, that second bullet point, merely identifying and quoting from the statute does not reasonably identify any particular subject that might be taken up, and typically the one I always think about is 19.851C, which talks about employment, compensation, promotion. It's got a whole bunch of different things in there, and I was talking to an administrative assistant one day, and she had just quoted all that language, and I said, well, are you thinking about promoting this individual? No, they're thinking about whether or not they're going to terminate this individual. I said, well, definitely don't put that promotion language in there. Are you thinking about potentially freezing this person's pay? And she said, well, that could be an option. So I said, well, compensation is probably okay to leave that in there, and then evaluation and some other words we felt were okay. But definitely, again, if you're not going to promote an individual, definitely don't leave that in there just because it's in the statute.
So you would take out the pieces of the statute that don't apply?
Correct, yeah.
Okay.
And then the Attorney General guide suggests that, if it is, for example, someone in the teacher bargaining unit or the teacher group, that you add a teacher, or if it's an administrator, you might add administrator or custodian, whatever the individual might be, so that people know what type of individual, what group they're in. And again, these are just some examples, not sufficient because it merely repeats the wording of the exemption, and then at the bottom there, the example says the board will consider convening in closed session to consider a non-administrative staff member's request for a discretionary unpaid leave of absence pursuant to 1985-1C and 1F of the statutes. So that would be a better way to write it, and I think would definitely capture and satisfy the law. There is kind of a gray area with regards to superintendent reports or some of those other report items there, committee reports, consent agenda, old business. I would say if the superintendent reports or if some of those reports are there You know, my past experience was the superintendent in Kakana would say, you know, hey, FYI, board members, there's going to be a reception for the football team that just did really good, or the cross-country team that just won state. And so just reminding you that that's coming up in a few days, reminding you of a few other things. So just kind of those feel-good type reminders, those types of things. But certainly I wouldn't want a heading on the agenda to just say superintendent report, and then it gets into some kind of deep, hot topic item, masking, CRT, COVID protocols, any of those types of things where someone would be like, oh my God, you guys talked about that topic that I'm really interested in. How did you talk about it? Because it wasn't on the agenda. And the response is, well, we buried it under superintendent's report. So don't do that if you can avoid it for sure. Public accessibility requirement. This gets a little bit more to the virtual meetings issues. If you guys are having all of your meetings here in the school district, people getting in and out should be fine. Really the only time this is going to come up, the accessibility issue, is if maybe you know ahead of time that your board room where you usually hold meetings, or maybe you have them up here, the place where you usually have meetings is not going to be sufficient for whatever group of people that you're hearing through the rumor mill is going to be there. And so maybe in that instance, you would say, okay, a meeting is being moved from the usual meeting spot to the auditorium or the gymnasium or whatever the case may be, in order to accommodate all the people. Or we're going to live stream it from the usual meeting space into another room where people can watch the meeting virtually.
Can you do something like that outside of your 24-hour agenda if you kind of post it and it's in the same building? Like I'd say from here to the auditorium,
Yeah,
if we had.
I
more
think I'd be
people than
okay
we
with that.
expected.
If you know it ahead of time, I mean, if you know on Friday that the Monday meeting is potentially going to be swarmed with 100 people and your location can only satisfy 25, I would try to get notice out on Friday. However, if it's 3 o'clock and you've got a 5:30, 6:30 meeting and all of a sudden you find out at that time, then putting a notice on the door saying we've moved it 100 feet down the hall or 100 yards down the hall is one thing. I think a district got in trouble somewhere in Wisconsin not too long ago because they moved it like to a completely different building. That was not looked upon too highly. So do the best you can, is always the kind of rule of thumb, but if you know, the farthest you know out, definitely change the notice then. Closed sessions, we've talked a little bit about. There is a mandatory process for getting into closed sessions. So you have to start an open, and then the presiding officer has to make the announcement. You've got the roll call vote. You've got a statement of which statute you're going to get into closed session for, all those different items. And it is important for that vote of the members of the board to be recorded in the minutes, so that if there is any dispute about why you guys are in closed session, and if you guys are in closed session inappropriately, that can be used as a defense by the individual board members. So I'm trying to think of a topic. Let's say a school board wants to talk about general compensation for teaching staff. That would be an open session topic. However, you put on the notice that you're talking about it under 19.851C, which is compensation, but it's compensation for like 1 or 2 individuals that you're going to be talking about under that closed session topic. And so, Cedric, you might say, hey, I don't think we should be in closed session. My experience, we should definitely be in open session for this topic. But the other 6 board members say, we don't care. We want to go into closed session on this topic. Your no vote, if there was any legal action, or if the district attorney was coming in and saying we might dole out some small fines to the board for this violation, you would be able to say, Cedric, I told them all that we should not be going into closed session. They didn't listen to me. So That's the importance of that roll call vote being recorded.
I tried.
Yeah, you tried. I did everything I could. Open meetings law with regards to some other closed session questions that come up. Voting in closed session is acceptable if it's necessary in order to protect whatever it is that you're talking about. So if you're talking about an expulsion, I think voting in closed session is okay. If you're talking about a non-renewal of an individual staff member, teacher, for example, that would probably be okay because you're continuing to protect that individual's identity. If you're talking about voting on a $5,000 increase for your superintendent, probably not, because at the end of the day, that's gonna be an open item anyway. So some of it, or maybe you vote in closed session, but then if someone makes a records request for that information 2 or 3 days later, it gets sent out anyway. But that is the general statement from the Attorney General Compliance Guide, is that if there's a reason to vote in closed session that keeps that information confidential, then you can vote in closed session. Minutes should be kept and recorded. They can be obtained sometimes, just depends on what the information is. As far as who attends closed session, that's gonna be on a case-by-case basis. So as a board, if you say, we feel like this particular individual needs to be at this particular, closed session, then it's up to you guys as to whether or not a particular individual should or shouldn't be there. And what should a board member do if discussion is drifting off topic? Kind of the same as an open session meeting. If the conversation is drifting, that's on all of you to say, we need to either get back on track, get the conversation back on track, or we need to go back into open session, or we need to adjourn. Confidentiality, of course, all of you, I think, know the importance of confidentiality, but sometimes it's required by law, like people records laws. Other times you might have policies that say you guys need to keep things confidential. Certainly it's a trust issue, can be legal consequences. Attorney-client privilege could be lost, and there could be legal liability for individuals who inadvertently disclose something that harms someone's reputation out in the community. So definitely keep things confidential. The exemptions under 19.85 parentheses 1, they're all listed. I'm not gonna go through them. If you have any questions, definitely stop me here as I go through these or at any time later on. So closed sessions, open sessions, kind of blew through that as quick as I could. Definitely, if anything does come up, give me a call or grab me before I leave tonight. I did need to switch to my handy dandy notes for rules of order at the meeting, because I am not a parliamentarian. Parliamentary procedure questions scare me a little bit because they're usually so fact specific, and a lot of times when there are arguments about parliamentary procedures, they can be, pitting one board member against another board member. So they are a little bit tricky, they can be, but they're also really important. It's really important to have a set of rules, a set of norms, that procedural machinery by which the board accomplishes its work. They protect board members. Oftentimes they protect individual board members that might be in the minority. So if you have a board member who really wants to speak on a particular issue, parliamentary procedures ensure that they have an opportunity to speak. At the same time, if that individual board member loses out to the majority, and the majority says this is how the majority of the board wants to move forward, parliamentary procedures also say, okay, you've had your opportunity and you lost, and so now we're going to move forward as a board. And so there are those nice protections, and I guess they go both ways, like I said, efficiency, but also protection, right? Rules of order, state law, of course, there are certain rules of order with regards to voting requirements and things like that. We've talked about some of those getting into closed session. Those would be certain parliamentary procedures. Locally developed policies, if you have Neola, most Neola policies that I've seen have some nod to Robert's Rules of Order in there. Definitely there can be local practices that have developed over time, and sometimes there are just those decisions where there's maybe not something that's real clear in Roberts, there's maybe not a past practice, and so the board president is just called upon to make a decision on the spot. So those ad hoc decisions that are made during meetings. Trying to think if there's anything. Oh, I think number 5 is really the critical piece there, is that as you go through the meeting, there's going to be questions about amendments, there's going to be questions about reconsideration or reconvening and tabling and some of those different things. At the end of the day, the most important thing is the wording of the motion that you guys are taking action on, so that everyone understands what you are voting on or not voting on, and the person who's recording the motion and the votes on that motion, that everyone understands and that it's properly recorded, because that is kind of the record of the board meeting going forward. So some of the important areas where state law mandates or limits, as I mentioned, some of those notice requirements, procedures for closed sessions. There are those roll call votes that I had also talked about. Secret ballots, there's the prohibition on use of secret ballots except when you're voting for board officers. And then notice of roll call votes being preserved for recorded and preserved and open to the public, again, to protect that board member from the district attorney if they're if the board is in closed session inappropriately. And there on the side, with regards to budget, with regards to non-renewal, there are certain state law requirements at certain times that are going to trump anything that you might have with regards to Roberts in your policy. And Neola does a good enough job of anytime those situations exist, that they're also spelling out exactly what it is that you need to do, rather than following some general thing in Robert's rules. Sorry, the slide got a little goofy there, but there are going to be areas, if you've ever read through Roberts, there is a paragraph in Roberts that does specifically say Roberts is designed for big groups, 12 plus, those types of boards. If you've ever been to convention, there's a delegate assembly where there's like 400 school board members that all get together and talk about and discuss and make amendments on various different resolutions for the WASB's work for the upcoming year. That's a place where Robert's Rules is really important. In a situation where you have 7 board members, probably less important that you get really laser focused on some of the nuts and bolts of Robert's Rules of Order. So here are just some examples of ways that Roberts might deviate from your current practice. So in your board, discussion on a particular issue is oftentimes going to be permitted before a motion has been made. In your board, members are generally probably just raise their hand, or sometimes may even just start talking, right? There's not a situation where someone has to go to a specific area in the room to speak. They don't have to go to a particular podium or something like that. They usually just stay in their seat, talk. Sometimes someone starts talking over them, but generally it's just a nice conversational atmosphere, whereas Roberts is much more procedural. The school board president should generally vote and participate in discussions. I'm assuming that's how it works here. Under Roberts, that may or may not be the case. Voting taking place by a variety of procedures, oftentimes, people just saying yes or yes or no. And procedures for electing board officers we've already talked about as well with regards to secret ballots. So a typical example, as I said, and this is probably how it works here 99% of the time. Member one makes a motion, another member says, I second that. And the board president says, here is the motion that's in front of all of you. Is there any discussion on that motion? Or sometimes you probably just say, is there any discussion? And depending on the length of the motion, depending on what it is that you're talking about, sometimes we highlight that because it's good to repeat exactly what the motion is so that everyone understands exactly what it is that you're talking about. Again, just depends on the specifics of the motion that's out there. So you've got discussion. After discussion it appears to be done, you might say, is there any more discussion? Does anyone have anything else to say? And everyone probably looks at you with kind of a blank stare, and you say, okay, motion or discussions are closed. Who would like to vote in favor of the motion? Oftentimes 6 or 7 people say yes, and you ask if there's any opposing votes, and sometimes more often than not you might get silence, and you say, okay, motion passes 7-0, something along those lines, or 6-0, or 6-1, whatever the outcome might be, so that it's properly recorded by whomever it is that's recording, administrative assistant or someone.
So I guess there's a place where we've stumbled, I'll say, a few different times in different ways. Amending the motions.
Yep.
That was, we've made a mess out of that a couple times, I'll say.
Yeah. Yep.
And is it better to just amend a motion, or is it better to, I think we've done it both ways, where we've amended one, or we've like just basically voted the initial one down and then made a new one? I mean, is it?
Yeah, and it can go either way, really. So, you know, if I was thinking about a motion, let's say, and there's a bunch of slides on this, I won't try to get to them, but let's say, for example, the motion is to increase teacher salaries by $500. That's a pretty straightforward motion. If that's the motion that's made and that's the motion that's seconded, another board member may say, I make a motion to amend to $750. And another board member might say, I make a motion to amend to $1,000. At that point, you've got a main motion for 500. You've got, well, here, let me skip ahead, just give you the visual. There. You've got the main motion. We call this the amendment tree because it kind of looks like a tree, but you've got the main motion for 500, that's the tan area. You've got the amendment for 750, that's the big branch in red. And then you've got the second amendment, which we'll call the twig, and that's kind of that little brown offshoot. Roberts says once you get to that point, you have to stop, because once you start getting too many twigs, it just gets to be far too cumbersome. So I would say at that point, as the board president, you would say, okay, we've got a main motion, we've got a motion to amend, we've got a second motion to amend. Let's see if there is a majority of board members that are in favor of either of those two amendments, and you'd start with the twig. So you'd say, okay, the twig is 1,000. Do we have a majority of board members that would like to amend the main motion to 1,000? Maybe no one.
Kind of work your way backwards
Yeah.
from the twig
Yep.
in. Okay.
You work your way back to see if the second amendment, I guess, trumps the primary amendment, if you have majority of people that like either one of those two amendments. And if either one of those two passes, the main motion now, that tan part, now says either 750 or 1,000, whichever one of those was the one that was victorious, I guess. And at that point then, if there's another board member who says, I didn't get to put a twig out there, so now I want to put a branch out there. I know that everyone just voted on amending the main motion to, let's say, $1,000. I want to make a motion to amend the $1,000 up to $1,250. So now you've got a new branch, and maybe no one proposes a twig, or maybe they do. But you just kind of follow that same process until you have worked through everyone's potential amendments. To get back to your original question, if you have a more complex original motion, maybe even something that's not worded very well, or it's just confusing, you certainly can scrap, and there's a particular, I can't think of it off the top of my head, but it's in one of the slides, motion to substitute, I think, something like that, where you just wipe out the initial motion, so you kind of wipe out that tan part of the tree, and you replace it with something. And again, as a 7-member board, you would say, yes, we're all in agreement that the new motion should be, it should read X, Y, Z, and as the board president, you probably read through it a few times, just so everyone has a clear understanding of what that new motion is going to look like.
So after you come back from the twig, and let's say you're going with that one, and you've got everyone that agreed to the twig, do you, at that point, already have your vote? Or
No.
At that point, you just amend the motion and then vote again?
Yeah, at that point, the only thing you voted on is the branch. You voted on the twig
Okay.
and the branch, and one of those was the one that won. So the main motion now, let's say again, it was switched from $500 to $1,000. And so now the discussion is whether or not $1,000 is what the board wants to give to the teachers for their compensation increase, and that can certainly fail. Because even though the majority of the board said we like $1,000 more than 500, through discussion, through that process, the majority of the board might say, we don't feel like 1,000 is the right number. And that could be where you get into 1,250, or you can get into 1,000 plus a sick day, or 750 and a sick. There's any number, obviously, of any different things that could be put in there with regards to amendments and twigs and branches. But at the end of the day, like I said, you kind of have that main trunk of the tree, and then you've got a branch. If an amendment is made, that becomes a branch. If another amendment is made, that becomes a twig. And then you work your way back to see if the main trunk of the tree is going to change. And then there could be additional amendments and twigs. Hopefully that kind of clarifies that, I guess.
And does each amendment need a second?
Generally, yes. So that's, I'd have to double check if there's an official statement in Roberts that says yes, but I've always thought that there needs to be. So hopefully that's something I get in Roberts over the years. But generally speaking, Roberts wants there to be seconds on motions. Otherwise, yeah, I mean, you could have amendments all over the place that as a board, there's only one individual that supports it. So that's why usually you call for a second. Okay, let's see. And that yellow part is just kind of what we had talked about, is that you don't vote on the actual planting of the main part of the tree until all the amendments have been worked through. So once you've gone through all the amendments, then you have discussion on the main part of the tree that's going to be the final big piece. And obviously, if the main tree gets voted down, then all the branches and the twigs and all that stuff, they kind of disappear as well. So. Okay, so what can a board do if a main motion was poorly worded? This gets into the motion to substitute, which is what we had talked about a second ago. Concept of a friendly amendment. It does have some limited usage under Robert's rules, so if someone maybe a new board member is kind of struggling to make an amendment, certainly as a board as a whole, you guys can kind of make some suggestions on how to word the amendment, or maybe if it's something that's financially related or people related, maybe the human resources person or the business manager may jump in. If it's curriculum related, maybe one of the curriculum folks might jump in and help out with the wording so that it's worded appropriately. There is the concept of unanimous consent. Typically that's going to be something, I don't know if you've ever used that, but typically that's going to be something where if there's a spelling mistake or just kind of like a general cleanup type issue, where some board member might say, hey, rather than their THEIR, you should have used their THY''RE. The grammar police And that might be a situation where the board president might say, okay, by unanimous consent, is everyone okay with us changing there to there? And everyone would say, yeah,
Should that
that's
just be
fine.
used for minor things? Because I'm thinking in the case that I feel like we got done amending a motion and a poorly worded one, and then reworded it, and then it was kind of like after we were done, I was like, okay, does everybody agree with what I just said?
Yeah,
Type of- and then-
I think I'm okay with that,
For the
because again,
motion.
you're, as a group, one person is saying, I make a motion to substitute, but perhaps I don't know the best way to properly word the motion. I don't like the way it's worded, it's confusing, it doesn't make sense, and maybe other board members are saying, yeah, we don't like it either. So I would be fine with you guys working as a group and saying, okay, let's, as a group, figure out how best to word the motion, and then saying, okay, do we have unanimous consent that this captures the way that the motion should have been worded? Because that's kind of the limited scope, is that you're just rewording the motion to capture what it should have said, right? So I think unanimous consent in that case is okay. You wouldn't want to use unanimous consent to get into any like substantive, more deeper issues of the motion itself, or of the issue itself, I should say. So these are, generally some of the more common issues that come up under Roberts, and, I say common, even some of them I don't know that I've even come across them too often, but motion to amend, we've just been talking about, motion to substitute, or motion to withdraw a motion. So if someone makes a motion and then someone makes a amendment or something like that, someone could say, oh yeah, I like that better, can I make a motion to withdraw my original motion? So that can pop up. Motion to divide a question, I've never actually had it come up, but I could see it in a situation where, for example, recommendation from administration says we want to give staff both a pay increase and some sick days. And that's our recommendation, and maybe the board is unanimous on, yeah, we like the pay increase, but we don't like the sick days, so can we divide the question into two separate questions? So there would be a motion for a pay increase and a separate motion on the sick days, one of which probably might die and one of which would be approved by the board. Motion to reconsider, motion to rescind. Again, those depend on whether it's at the same meeting, whether it's at a later meeting. Motion to amend a prior action, that's something that occurs at a later meeting. There are these 2/3 vote requirements, and those tend to be pretty more kind of extreme measures. So if debate and discussion has been going on for a long, long time, someone might say, you know what, this is getting ridiculous. I'm gonna make a motion to end debate and have a vote on this particular issue. And then that would be seconded, but it would require a 2/3 vote in order to pass. Motion to suspend the rules, I've not ever seen that one used, but obviously if there's something going on and you say this just isn't working for us, we would like to suspend the rules. Maybe that was something that could have been used around the time of COVID with virtual meetings, where you have all sorts of procedures and policies and things like that talk about how a typical board meeting is going to be run, and you've got to show up face to face, and you've got to do all of these different things. That could be a time where maybe a motion to suspend the rules temporarily could have been used. Motion to postpone indefinitely, table a question, refer to a committee. I think those are pretty self-explanatory. The biggest issue, so if it's a motion to reconsider during that same meeting, the person who's making the motion has to be someone who is on the majority side to begin with. So if you have discussion on an issue and it ends up being a 4-3 vote, someone who's on the losing side and on the 3 side can't say later on, a motion to reconsider that vote that I lost from earlier in the meeting. That's where Roberts comes in, trying to keep things as efficient as possible. However, someone who was on the majority side could certainly say, I would like to have a motion to reconsider. I've had, whatever has been going on in my mind, and I think we should have a revote on that issue. Maybe it was a 7-0 vote, maybe it was a 6-1 vote, and the motion, the reconsideration and their change in their vote won't actually matter, but they want it on the record that they voted a different way for whatever reason. Or maybe it is a situation where they're changing their vote would actually impact the final outcome. A motion to rescind would happen at a later meeting, and any board member can make that motion, whether they were winning or losing. Yes.
That motion to reconsider, does that have to happen directly after that vote happened, or say later on in the meeting they're thinking about it, then they can go back on the agenda and say?
Yeah, just during the meeting,
Anytime.
It wouldn't have to be, within 30 seconds or anything like that.
Just
but-
before you adjourn?
Yeah, I would say before you adjourn, I wouldn't hold off on doing it until we're in the open session part, then we go to closed session, then we
Sure.
come back to open session, oftentimes literally for 15 seconds
Yeah.
just to adjourn. I wouldn't wait until that portion, because there could be people who were in the gallery and went home.
Yeah.
But I would say as long as you're within, that usual open period, discussion period, you're gonna be okay.
Does the motion to rescind at a later meeting, does that have to be on the agenda?
Yes, I would say that it would need to be on the agenda. Well, the motion to, I take that back, the motion to rescind wouldn't need to be on the agenda, that topic would at least need to be on the agenda. So if it's,
Right.
let's just use masking or, COVID protocols or something like that, because that's oftentimes, at least recently, something that has been on many school boards' agendas every single time. So, if action on masking was on, one agenda item, and then masking was on the next agenda, and one board meeting you voted to require masks, and at the next board meeting, it was up for action again, and you say, I would like to rescind that motion from last time, that would be the place for it. But I would definitely say that general topic would need to be on the agenda. Any questions on those? Okay. Motion to reconsider, we've just talked about with regards to same meeting, made and seconded, some of the general requirements for a reconsideration. Rescind, motion to rescind, any board member, no specific time limit on that, so it could even be 2 meetings later, something like that. So those are some of the requirements there. Some additional Robert's Rules types of skills or language, Robert's language, that you might want to be aware of as board members. Request for information, request directed at the chair or through the chair for information relevant to the business at hand, but not necessarily related to parliamentary procedure. Can the high school principal explain the school's current practice regarding whatever topic it is? Again, this is where Roberts gets kind of formal. Oftentimes, as a school board, especially if the high school principal is in the audience, or any of the principals is in the audience, a lot of board members just look out to the audience and say, hey, can you tell me what's the practice on such and such? Versus looking at you and saying, can you direct the high school principal to tell us what that is? So again, a little bit more formal. It just depends on your practices, but oftentimes school boards are a little bit less formal than that. Parliamentary inquiry, that's a situation where oftentimes a newer board member, or maybe a board member that's been around for a while, doesn't understand how to do something, make an amendment, table something, do a reconsideration motion, something like that. So they ask you as the board president, how do I do whatever it is that I'm interested in doing? So that would be a parliamentary inquiry. Point of order would be a situation where a board member feels like you've maybe gone off track a little bit with regards to Robert's Rules of Order. And so you'd ask for a point of order, and there's an example there with regards to closing debate requiring a 2/3 vote. But the original thought was that it's only a majority vote, so that would be something where someone would say, point of order, that vote requires a 2/3 vote, not a simple majority vote. So that would be a good example there. Question?
I've had, like, in the past, where we were there voting on something, and I've discussed this with these guys before about, you know, we're voting on something about the teachers, and at that time I wasn't the president, and I would have liked to have asked the teachers what they thought of what we were passing, because they're gonna obviously directly affect them, and I don't know what goes on in their classroom per se. It's like, I felt like there's information there that I would like to have before the vote. Since then, I've asked those questions sometimes in meetings, and Donna has beat me for it after. But I can understand, I feel like I'm kind of caught in the middle, because I feel like most of the time in our meetings, it's either been me or Jenny will allow someone besides board members to speak. I feel like I can understand where I could definitely get myself where the whole thing could go south. It hasn't in any of the instances we've had where maybe we've had a community member that just had a question in the middle of our discussing a topic, and we've let that happen. Any words of wisdom on that?
I think this would probably be something outside of Roberts. I think if you asked, just based on the information in Roberts would say,
Absolutely not.
Absolutely not. But I've seen many boards, like I said, where if there's a question of a principal or a staff member, a teacher that might have knowledge, one of the paraprofessional leaders who's in the audience, and there's an issue about the paras that comes up, and board members say, hey, Sally, what do you think of this particular question? We'd like to get your feedback because you know better than anyone. And so I have seen that happen. Like I said, offhand, I think it probably would be something where the book of Roberts, if you found that in there, the book would say that's not allowable. But like I said, the book also says Roberts is not really designed for small 7-member boards. And so you guys wanting to get as much flexibility as possible might allow that to happen. I wouldn't want it to happen too often, because then you get into the whole issue of public comment time.
Right.
And you have public comment time at the beginning of the meeting, but then all of a sudden someone who maybe sticks around for later on in the meeting is now being allowed to have additional public comment time that wasn't properly noticed. So I would have it be very limited to, just nutsy boltsy kind of fact specific type things. Or if you're interested in having that individual provide their expertise on a particular issue, ask them to maybe be on the agenda as a presenter during that particular time. Because then at least it's on the agenda that,
They're gonna speak in.
yeah, paraprofessional leadership is going to make a statement about the wage increase that's being considered, or something like that.
So
Yeah.
is that different, like, if it's staff, then I consider it's kind of like gathering information, but what happens if it's somebody in the public who wants to be involved in the discussion of board? Then I look at it that that's public comment.
I would agree, yeah, and I think that's why I would say, again, different boards are gonna handle it differently. I think technically it's probably something where Robert's rules would say absolutely not. Public comment time is public comment time, and outside of that, the public shouldn't be speaking. The open meetings law, I've not particularly specifically seen anything that specifically says absolutely can't happen. It falls into that gray area, and I think depending on the hot topic issue, how hot of a topic is it, how big of a topic is it, allowing one community member to say something, it just kind of creates a situation where other community members are gonna say, hey, Donna got to speak as you're not a community member, but, Donna, the community member out there, got to speak, and I didn't get to speak, I only got to speak during public comment time. So keep it at a minimum, try to avoid it if at all possible, because even if it's not an open meetings law violation, it can give the appearance of a violation.
Well, and I think I'll have to look at policy, because I think it says something in our policy that if there is public comment, that is where the public speaks, no place else.
Yeah, yeah, and that's a good point, yeah. Public policy, if you have a public comment policy, some are much more specific than others, some are much more general than others, but some do say specifically it happens at the beginning of a meeting, the end of a meeting, limited to 5 minutes, people can only speak once, you know, all of those different ins and outs of public comment time. So if someone misses public comment time, but then all of a sudden shows up and says, you know, can the board, you know, offer me 3 minutes to speak on this particular topic, and you do it one time, you just open the door that the next time it happens, someone is going to make that same claim. Or like I said, someone's gonna make a claim that there was a open meetings law violation because your agenda.
A lot of
wasn't
times your
followed
public,
right down to the T.
person from the public who wants to talk too, and they, before the board has really had a chance to talk about it themselves, you know, when they're trying to influence your thinking, you know, and I don't like that, because I like to talk about it with the board first, you know, before we take.
Yeah. And that's, you know, like Donna said, I mean, that's why policy says
Yeah.
public comment time happens at this particular moment of the meeting, you know.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of, even within our discussions on how we've had a lot of great open discussions where, you know, there's something I didn't think about that Corey did, or vice versa. And I think that at times there's, like I said, a community member, a staff member, someone that might have been there that has, maybe someone who's a nurse, you know, with all the COVID stuff, that has a good insight on maybe a question that one of us just posed, to not let them, you know, answer a simple question or to say something seems kind of crazy to me, I guess. And like I said, I understand where you can't let it get out of hand also, and I could see where it could go bad, but I don't know.
It's typically fine till it's not.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Yeah, you know, and I guess I would maybe differentiate between those two situations as well. If it's a situation where, as a board, you're looking out in the audience and saying, oh, hey, Mary, our school nurse, happens to be here tonight.
Right.
She might be able to comment on some issue or provide some factual information that maybe we're not aware of or administrative team's not aware of. I think asking a question of an expert who's in the audience is different than, you know, a community member coming in and for whatever reason missing public comment time and saying, hey, can you ignore your policy, ignore your rules, and let me have my 3 minutes to speak even though I missed public comment time. So like I said, I would try to avoid it at all costs. Let's see, point of order. Appeal from a decision of the presiding officer, so this would be a situation where the presiding officer makes a parliamentary ruling, and a couple other board members are saying, no, you got that absolutely wrong, so there might be an appeal from a decision. Suspending the rules, we had talked about briefly. Requires a 2/3 vote, and then obviously adjournment at the end of the meeting. Some things for the presiding officer to know with regards to parliamentary procedure, obviously the rules for getting into closed session, voting requirements, and whether, you know, a 2/3 vote is required, roll call vote, secret ballots, those types of things. Plans for directing discussion or debate amongst the board, or oftentimes, you know, it's just kind of wide open. Whoever is most interested in speaking, speaks. Laws and board policies related to public comment. Particular motions are amendable, debatable, motions taking precedence over others, handling inquiries, points of order, appeals, and then handling issues surrounding meeting decorum. So just some things for the board president to definitely be aware of. We always recommend that policies exist with regards to pretty much anything and everything that a school board can think of. And of course, that's definitely having a policy with regards to public comment time, having a public policy with regards to rules of order. We would definitely recommend that as well. And again, you would have that as a Neola district. Final nuggets with regards to Robert's rules. Being clear, I think the second bullet point, and I touched on it a little bit earlier, but being clear about your intent in making a motion is ultimately more important than using those specific words. So motion to reconsider, you might get that mixed up with a motion to rescind, or a motion to suspend versus a motion to table versus some of those things. As long as your intent of what you want to do is understood by the group and in the minutes and kind of memorialized going forward, I think that's the important thing. So as a board then, that's a situation where other board members can jump in and say, I think you mean a motion to amend or a motion to rescind versus a motion to reconsider, because a motion to reconsider says this and a motion to rescind says this, and you guys can kind of help each other out with regards to Roberts and the specific verbiage. And then, of course, public comment was kind of the final issue, final topic that you guys wanted me to touch upon a little bit tonight. With regards to public comment time, the law provides great flexibility to school boards in structuring public comment periods. However, boards must be very cautious about content and viewpoint-based restrictions. Very helpful to have board policy on public comment time. Presiding officer must be willing and able to assert a strong presence and consistently enforce the rules and, of course, exercise patience. Public comment period, of course, is not the only way or typically the best way to obtain input from individuals, and that's kind of what we had said before. You know, if you're interested in what the paraprofessionals are thinking on a particular issue, I don't know that I would get that information through public comment time, or, you know, during the middle of a board meeting, maybe talk to them or have them present to the board at the meeting rather than giving them 3 minutes during public comment time. Board Policy 187, that's just a reference to the WASB Policy Resource Guide. I'm not 100% sure what your public policy or public participation policy would be for Neola. It's somewhere in the 1000 series, or no, the 0 series maybe, because they're coded a little bit differently than PRG. The biggest piece, when a school board chooses to allow members of the public an opportunity to address the board, must be noticed in the meeting, so I think that's probably pretty self-explanatory. Otherwise, you shouldn't be having it. And I have run into situations where committees, for example, policy committee or a budget and finance committee, someone shows up to one of those meetings and wants to speak. That should not be happening. If it has happened, obviously there's nothing that can happen to fix it. But if you're going to allow public comment during one of those committee meetings, then it definitely should be noticed that members of the public can come and speak during those committee meetings. Also, big piece, when a school board receives public comments on topics or issues that are not otherwise part of the agenda, according to the Attorney General, it's permissible for board members to briefly discuss and respond to the issue. However, the board may not take formal action on any such topic or issue. The biggest question is, what exactly does it mean to briefly discuss something? So I and members of the WASB and probably your legal team at Weld would say better not to really get into any kind of conversation with anyone that comes to public comment time and makes a comment or asks questions. You know, I think if someone puts out some information that is factually inaccurate, someone says that your annual budget is $1 billion, You certainly could say, well, actually, our annual budget is much less than $1 billion. You know, it's however many $1 million it is, or if someone says you have a staff of 5,000 teachers, you know, that would be a point where you could step in and correct them or answer a question for them. But I feel most comfortable if the boards that I work with don't get into a whole lot of back and forth with folks that come to public comment time. Just direct them to whichever administrator might be able to help them out. Direct them that maybe you'll take their issue up at a future board meeting. Those types of responses are usually the way that I would handle it. Questions. These are more of some policy questions. Which meetings are you going to have public comment? Is it every meeting? Only certain meetings? Are you going to have public comment at committee meetings? How is public comment time going to be structured? Does every person who shows up for public comment time get to speak? Or is it going to be limited to, let's say, 30 minutes? Is it going to be limited per person to 3 minutes, 4 minutes, 5 minutes? Is it first come, first served? Does the individual have to live in the district or be an employee of the district or have some ties to the district? Do they have to be speaking on an issue that is on the agenda? Some districts do that in order to limit what type of discussion is coming up during the public comment time. So there are limitations that you as a board can place on public comment time. The problem comes in when, and these are just some of the things I just talked about, the problem comes in when, for example, someone wants to come in and say something about an employee, or they want to say something negative about administration, they want to make some negative comments, and as the board president, you say, we don't like your viewpoint, called viewpoint discrimination, not that you're actually gonna say that, but you would say, we don't like what you're gonna say, so we're gonna stop you right there. That's where boards sometimes get into trouble, because if someone comes in and says, I really like the 8th grade teacher, she's amazing, you're not gonna stop that conversation, right? You like that viewpoint, but then if the next person in line says, the 8th grade teacher's garbage, and she's doing a terrible job with my kid, then you might wanna jump in and stop that type of conversation. So you don't want to discriminate on viewpoints, but you can set reasonable parameters on things like the number of minutes and those types of things. Those are called content neutral limitations. So those are okay.
So to go on that, the statement that you typically say at the beginning, where if anyone makes
Right.
comments about
I think like,
people on the.
yeah, or use.
We set some
particular
guidelines.
name, or, yeah, we have some guidelines that.
Just not
Well,
using
then-
specific names,
Right.
and that's just in general, I guess, we don't really say good or bad, that would be okay, right?
Yeah, I mean, if you're, so your statement is, if you wanna talk about staff, no names. I think that's probably a general enough statement, so, if someone comes in, they can still say, a particular staff member at your middle school is terrible, and they've done terrible things, and I think they should be fired. You wouldn't necessarily limit that viewpoint. You're just saying, we don't want you to use their name. As long as when someone comes in and says, this 8th grade teacher or this middle school teacher is amazing and her name is Jenny Smith and she's wonderful, and as long as you're not allowing the name to come in when wonderful things are being said, but censoring that information when bad things are being said. I think that's arguably when someone could say, my viewpoint is being discriminated against, because they allow all the good stuff to come in, but when negative stuff is when I want to talk about negative stuff, then they're trying to stop that information from coming in. So that's, again, where the problem could exist.
So is there, and I don't know that you remember exactly how it's worded, because I think some of it in general has been, because we wouldn't have personnel type discussions, you know, that way. I mean, the other example that I've heard before is someone wants to talk about their own child, and because of FERPA, even if it's their child and they say they want to, that boards have gotten in trouble then because of violation for that. I know there's kind of two different questions, but.
Yeah, and I was gonna say, generally speaking, if I as a parent wanted to disclose, you know, how my daughter is doing in school, that's free, I mean, that's my information, that's her information. I suppose there could be something in FERPA depending on the age of the student, depending on certain specific facts. So I wouldn't wanna say blanketly that as a parent, I can go into a public meeting and say whatever I want about my kid, because there could be, depending on the age, depending on the circumstances, some potential problems. But yeah, generally speaking, I would think that would be more often than not okay, because I'm the parent. But like I said, once kids get to be older, they have more rights. Or if they have certain issues going on, mental health issues,
Well, I think
medical
the
issues, some things
example
like
that
that.
we heard about was a special education
Yeah.
student, so maybe that put that in a different. So what we have said is if you begin talking about a specific person violating their legal right to privacy. So I don't know if that's appropriate or not. I mean, I would say it's implemented pretty consistently.
Right.
Because at
I've
least
never had
that's
this happen
talked about at the
anymore,
front end,
yeah.
so people really just don't do it, but.
And I mean, to be honest, your statement about don't talk about any type of personnel issues,
Mhm.
don't talk about any student issues is very similar to how many school districts handle it. I think it just comes down to, at the end of the day, if you did stop someone and said you can't talk about that particular issue because we don't like what you're saying, if they then challenge that, there might be a chance that you're not going to be successful. But I would say if you're interested in tweaking that statement that you make prior to public comment time, I would get in touch with Weld and just say, hey, you know, we had someone from WSB come in and talk about viewpoint-based discrimination, and do you feel like our statement is okay? And they might say, yeah, because we would rather have the potential for a lawsuit down the road rather than someone coming in and bad-mouthing staff. So that's something that you would just need to work out with them. Let's see, I think we've covered a lot of this. As far as enforcement, the general recommendation from WASB is that if someone starts making comments that you don't like, that you interject and you attempt to redirect them through a complaint procedure, for example. So if someone comes in and again is talking about that middle school teacher that they don't like, that would be a time where you might say, hey, listen, I don't mean to cut you off, but we have a complaint procedure. Here's that individual's supervisor, the person who supervises the middle school. Would you feel comfortable getting in touch with that individual or the superintendent or whomever and going through the complaint process? Because quite honestly, standing up at a public comment time during a board meeting is probably the least efficient, effective way for someone to get to the bottom of some type of complaint. Usually that should kind of be the last thing that someone does if they've already gone through talking to the teacher, talking to the principal, talking to, you know, going up that chain of command. That should be kind of the last thing that they do rather than the first thing. So you may interrupt, cut off a speaker whose speech is threatening, obscene, unduly disruptive, or disorderly. And certainly if there's a situation where individual board members look like they may want to respond to something, as the board president, you might want to jump in and say, okay, I've got this. Let me respond to this particular individual rather than having multiple board members thinking that it's appropriate for them to respond. Because again, my preference is that board members not get too engaged in responding to public comment time. These are some of the different approaches. Limiting to agenda items. It doesn't sound like that's something that you guys do, but I know some boards do that. Redirecting complaints. And then, of course, the final approach, taking the legal risk, which I think is kind of where you guys are at, is that if someone comes in and says a bunch of negative stuff about a particular staff member, that if you cut them off, there could be that legal risk. And there's some cases there from different federal circuits that talk about similar situations where people were at governmental meetings and said something that the board didn't like, and the board cut them off, and they ended up getting into some legal action. So that is the approach, but that would be something that you definitely would talk to Weld about. And with that,
But we did agree, we're gonna remind a little bit here, was there a specific question regarding social media
Oh, yeah.
types of things? It's not a topic we've got a bunch of information set up yet, but it was something that I think came in after your last discussion. Was there a specific question about that at all? Do you remember?
I don't know if it was a question or even, because I know you've had some of the webinars that you've had that have covered some of that. Some of it might just be a reminder about, I don't know if archiving is the right word, but just the, like records, retention,
Sure. Okay.
responsibilities. As you comment as a parent or a community member, wherever you are, I realize you're still a board member, but I think it was around that records piece.
yeah, so with regards to records retention, I think the legal recommendation probably pretty unanimously is board members should have individual email accounts that are set up by the school district, and they shouldn't use their personal email accounts for any type of school business. So if someone emails your personal account and says, I really want to talk to you about the new football stadium that you guys are thinking about building, your response should be, this is my personal account. In the future, please send all questions to my school district account, and then make sure you forward that email over to your school district account. That way, if a records request comes in, an open records request comes in, whoever runs your IT department can very quickly pull that information, and it's stored and it's on servers. So it takes the records request, satisfying the records request out of your hands. So if a records request happens, as board members, you say, I don't do anything on my personal email, I don't do anything on my personal Facebook page, I don't do anything on my personal stuff. Everything is all done via school Facebook, school Twitter, school whatever. And so then the superintendent and the IT staff here can handle satisfying that request. If you start engaging in school business via a personal Twitter, a personal Facebook, a personal email account, Gmail, Yahoo, whatever it might be, then you just run the risk of, when those records requests come in, that you haven't been very vigilant in making sure that, like I think you said, or maybe someone said, those comments, like, Facebook comments, Twitter comments, sometimes that's the only reason I go into my Facebook account, is to scroll through and go into a comment page and just see all the different crazy comments that people are making over certain issues. But if you have a personal account and all of a sudden you've got community members commenting, and maybe you as a board member comment back, now you've got a records retention issue, and probably needs to be saved for 7 years, I would guess, under the Wisconsin public records retention laws. And I don't know how long Facebook actually saves that stuff, but I can't believe that it would be 7 years. So it just kind of creates a mess. Whereas if things, my understanding from talking to IT people is that if things are run through a school district, maybe a school building account, a school district account, whatever, that they can set things up so that those comments and those posts and different things are all archived for the appropriate number of years. So that's kind of the gist on that, if I hopefully covered everything
so.
there. But I personally would try to avoid, as a board member, conducting any kind of school business via a personal account.
I think some of the times it's come up as almost more informational or providing clarity, like you were saying, you know, if someone comments on Facebook, oh, the school is spending $5 billion this year, the budget is $5 billion. So for one of us to comment on that and say, that's not accurate.
Yeah, yep.
Would be advisable or not advisable?
What I would say, if that's happening on your personal Facebook.
It's happening on, no, probably a community member's Facebook.
Oh, okay.
And it's getting a lot of attention because
Yeah,
they're
yeah,
saying,
yeah.
this is going on at the school. The
Yeah.
school board is doing this.
Yeah, so random community member
Right.
and random community members are commenting.
Right.
And you're just seeing about it because
right.
it's getting through word of mouth or
Right.
local gossip that there's all sorts of scuttlebutt going on.
So do we just stay off of that, or do we interject
I
and
would-
say, here's the facts?
I would recommend staying off it. I might, in that situation, talk to the superintendent and say, or some administrator and say, hey, listen, FYI, we've got this referendum coming up and there's all sorts of misinformation going on, or whatever the case might be. There's all sorts of misinformation going on. Should we as a board, or do you as the superintendent, perhaps directed by the board, should we get something out to the community so that this misinformation or disinformation campaign, so we can kind of cut it off? But I wouldn't generally recommend individual board members engaging with individual community members. Legally, I don't know, other than kind of the retention issue, like I said, I don't know that there would be anything legally that would say no. Your board policies might say that those types of social media conversations are not allowed. You'd have to look at the specific Neola policies with regards to social media.
I can't answer that off the top of my head.
Yeah, and I can't either, and I've read their policies a number of times too, but
I know there's some reference to it, but I can't remember exactly.
I tend to answer factual things like, the meeting's at 6:30 tonight, not 7. You know?
Yeah, and I probably wouldn't care so much about if it's something like that, if it's more ministerial, like, you know, like you said, meetings at 6:30 or 6:15 or something like that. But yeah, if it's, you know, FYI, you know, you said 4 million, but it's actually 3,897,000, and it's kind of that type of back and forth. I would say maybe either let it slide, or if it's some major issue, have the board as a whole address it, or the superintendent address it, or see if there's some way to get your information out there. But like I said, legally, I don't know if it's necessarily a legal issue as it is a policy issue, if that makes sense.
Do we have any policy on social media?
We do, that's what we were just talking about, I'd have to pull it up. I think it references it, but I don't think it's extremely specific that way, but.
Yeah, so
I
that
would
might,
look at
going
that.
forward, that might be an area for policy development. Do you have a policy committee?
We actually do committee of the whole.
Okay, oh, yeah, that's right, I'm sorry. So, as committee of the whole, you might say, okay, let's take a look at policy, whatever, and see if we want to tweak it, and you might need to get Neola involved, for adjusting a policy, but,
Right. I've had people reach out via Facebook Messenger, and I'll typically respond like, here's my phone number and here's my school email address, like contact me at one of these two.
Yeah, yeah.
But, you know, I won't have the discussion via Messenger.
yeah, I would agree. I think that's a great way of handling it, is just deferring them to the appropriate lines of communication, and then that way, like I said, if it's electronic, it's archived, because the school district handles that for you. If it's a phone call, then, you know, you can take your own notes of what was said and how you responded.
I've got a handful of questions that probably relate more to yours. Do you want me to wait until we're done, or do you want me to?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
What?
This question kind of relates to an experience I had on the town board. Town board, somebody bring a platter of cheese and crackers. stay after the meeting, have a platter of cheese and crackers, or maybe stay 15, 20 minutes, shoot the breeze, whatever. That turned into all of a sudden every meeting somebody's bringing some food, staying an hour, 2 hours later. That starts to go in the committee, like, what are you doing there till 11 o'clock at night? The meeting's over.
Yeah.
And so the question really comes down to, like, you know, when the meeting's adjourned, like, how, like, Brad and I sit around and shoot the breeze about farming, or do we gotta kind of skedaddle and get out of here?
Legally, so long as you are not discussing school business, it's not an issue, right? So you go to the local restaurant, have coffee, breakfast together, some board members do that. That's not an issue, it's just, the issue is the appearance. So if it happens all the time, kind of the meeting after the meeting where the board adjourns and the community leaves, but then all the board members stick around, it just, like I said, it's just the appearance that, what are they doing in there for especially a long, long time. If it's like 5 or 10 minutes where you guys are just chatting about kids and farming and deer hunting and stuff like that, I don't think it's probably going to raise as many eyebrows, but if it gets to be every meeting and it gets to be a long, long time, then you might have people saying what's going on and raising some complaints. But legally, again, the question is whether or not you're talking about governmental business.
Right, makes sense. All right, this is a minor one, but I noticed that after the meeting's adjourned, we sign the financial approval, so for a basis saying we approve all the financial records. Should we be doing that during the meeting? Because it feels like we've adjourned the meeting and then we all sign the document, like we're all still here.
Yeah, I mean, is that, you make the motion during the open
We
session?
make the motion to
Yeah.
approve it, so is it just,
It gets approved.
Yeah, I think that's just the ministerial duty
Okay.
of someone signing it. I think I'd be fine with that.
Okay.
And I think every board that I've seen tends to do it that way.
we got called out of the town board at one point because we signed all the checks after the meeting,
Okay,
even though we approved them in the meeting.
okay.
And they were said, well, you're conducting town business after the meeting.
Yeah, I mean, I can look into that a little bit further, especially if you got dinged at a different meeting, a different board for it. But like I said, I wouldn't think that the ministerial duty of actually signing the document is what matters. I think the biggest thing, at least from my perspective, is that the vote on the numbers and who the money goes to and all that stuff, that vote is taken, and that's the clear piece.
Right.
And just actually sitting down and signing the paperwork is really secondary to that.
Probably could have it in your minutes too,
Yeah.
they can do that.
Yeah.
Right,
So
yeah.
then it wouldn't matter.
Yeah, I mean, that was all part of the record, but it was the fact that we would adjourn and then we spent 10 minutes signing checks.
Yeah.
You know.
And like I said, I typically, that's how I've seen most boards handle it.
Yeah.
I think it's just to save the public from the time of.
Right, and that's what we were doing, but
Yeah.
we got
Yeah.
called out on it.
I don't know.
I know, they're pretty picky over there.
So it's what it is.
So another question, like on the agendas, so, you know, we get the agendas, you know, a few days in advance. And sometimes there's real obvious things that Jenny's sharing information on the agenda that's not part of the public agenda. Like, we've had a discussion on a facilities issue, we got the final bids in, it's gonna be come up for action, and she'll say something like, you know, we recommend a motion to approve this. Is that okay to say those types of things before the meeting? Is that something we should wait and have the discussion in the meeting? Like,
I'm okay with that,
Okay.
coming from administration. and
Right.
Because I
often-
have always said,
Yeah.
like, here's my recommended motion.
Right.
Kind of even in quotes.
Yeah.
Right.
But that's sort of the protocol that I had lived with before.
Right.
And even on things, you know, staffing plans, budgets, I mean, a lot of stuff, you'll get recommendations from other administrators outside of her saying this is what the district recommends.
Right.
I think that, again, the biggest issue is that if the recommendation's coming from administration, it's okay. The bigger issue is if you as board members start saying, well, hey, how do you feel about this particular
Right.
recommendation? How do you think you're gonna vote? Here's how I'm gonna vote. Those would be the discussions you'd wanna avoid.
A lot of times we've directed her to do that too.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's
Well,
why-
and
that's
again,
why-
I bring it up more not because I think Jenny's trying to like persuade anybody, is because I've been told, like, when people come to the meeting, is they'll see something on the agenda and, you know, Al will say, okay, I need a motion for this.
Yeah.
We'll get a motion seconded, everybody approve, and we're like, and the public's like, wait, what just happened? Like, you know, it's the first time it's been on the agenda, but it's because we've already, you know, seen the material and we've read through the material, so we're already advised,
Yeah.
you know, on what the situation is, and so we already know and it's obvious to us, but the public had no idea, like,
Yeah.
why was that decision made?
I guess the better question would be whether or not the information that's being provided from administration to the board is something that has to be kept confidential until the board meeting hits. You know, if you're making a recommendation on a curriculum adoption, is that something that has to be kind of confidential only for board members to see between Thursday and Monday? Or could it be something where the agenda itself says recommendation from administration to approve new 3rd, 4th grade materials from such and such vendor?
So typically how I've done it is kind of 3 tiers. So there's kind of the general agenda that just is the paper agenda that gets posted. And then there's a public agenda that would have supporting documents for action items other than the piece under the consent that has the personnel and the minutes and all of that.
Sure.
But what I haven't included is, so everybody sees the material, but not necessarily here's my recommendation.
Okay.
That's been more just a text that I put on a board, like I call it the board agenda.
Yeah. And I think either way you handle it could be okay. Whether the recommendation is clearly spelled out in the agenda, the notice that goes out to public, or whether the recommendation, I think it's probably assumed or presumed that if there's going to be discussion and action on a curriculum adoption or on some item, that there's potentially is going to be a recommendation from administration that's attached to it. But I guess I think that's something for you guys to think about going forward, is would you rather have that information going out to the public on Thursday or Friday so that they can see what is the recommendation of the administration, and is the administration recommending a particular course of action?
Right, and I think like at the meeting, you usually have that up on the screen, so it's not like it's private, right? Like by the time we get to the meeting, it's already there. And that's where I always question, like, should it be part of the initial agenda that the public sees versus they don't want to see till they get to the meeting?
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's something that, you know, we could probably have further
Right,
discussion.
and I guess part of it is that how I've done it is how I was used to doing it sort of in other places, you know. I mean, the other piece I think with that is, as board members understand, just because that's my recommended motion, someone might choose to make a completely different
Right,
motion.
and we have, right,
And,
yeah.
like, that's fine, like, that doesn't hurt my feeling, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That, so I didn't wanna give the impression that's what we're doing when we haven't even gotten there, so I think, you know.
Yeah, and like I said, I think that would go either way.
Okay.
I've worked with districts where the packet that goes out to the board on Wednesday or Thursday has recommendations from anyone from the superintendent on down to, you know, district office personnel that might be recommending the staffing plan from the HR department, or some
Right.
financial stuff from the business department. So those recommendations, just again, depending on past practice and how different administrators come up through the system, the documentation that they might put together might have the last line on it, might say, I recommend the district approve my staffing plan, and then they sign it. And so that information is in the Wednesday, Thursday packet versus, you know, another way. I don't think there's necessarily a right or wrong, it's just how you guys prefer it as a board.
And then the last one, I know Brad wants to go, he's probably tired of me talking already. Yep. So, yep. I know, like, we get asked, like, sometimes, like, what do we wanna have on the agenda, right? And then, so we kind of talk about things, and then it gets on the agenda, but maybe not what we talked about, but it's gonna be covered. And a specific example, use this tonight, like, we've got agenda item WASB development, right? But I think one of the things, you know, I brought up was walking quorum, which fell underneath this. And clearly, you know, there's 4 topics on here, right? So this probably all came up in different areas in the board rounding. Would you prefer that the agenda say WASB development, comma, you know, public comment procedures, like, how specific do you want that to be? Only because I know, like, if my wife looked at that, she'd be like, I don't know what's going on there tonight. Like, it doesn't mean anything to her, right?
Yeah, I mean, you probably could have been more specific there, and kind of like the example that I used where something said, like, superintendent's report, or, you know, I think there were a few different examples where the recommendation is not just have superintendent's report, but superintendent's report, and then, you know, subtopic A, subtopic B, subtopic C. So that certainly could have been a situation where the notice could have been more specific, yeah.
Right. And I know we pay by the word in the paper too, and it's not cheap on, you know, anymore nowadays, but,
Yeah.
I fight that at the town board all the time too, like they wanna keep it short, I'm like, no, you gotta, like, it's gotta be a sentence this long, cause nobody's gonna know what it means otherwise.
Yeah, and you know, that could be a situation too where you look at how you notice things out to the public, because there's the change, in 2020, where you can now notice things via the district's website, so that might be a cost-saving measure as well, as, you know, you post it in town and then you
Right,
post it
and
on
for
the website.
us, that's how it's done, so
Yeah.
that isn't an issue
Okay,
as much.
okay.
And
Okay.
I think on our regular meetings, I think it is delineated differently, like superintendent report, and then it's just, again, A, B, C, D, whatever
Yeah.
the topics are. This, you know, part of it was, and I guess it's maybe a good example, so if, as we talked, if I would have said, here's the topics, A, B, C, D, but then somebody asked you a question about expulsions, are we at risk there? I don't know. I mean, that's where
Yeah.
and maybe we just say we can't talk about expulsions and that's the answer. I'm not sure what about, you know, so I guess part of it is when things were informational. I mean, cause even the next one, you talk about the DPI report card, we'll go through that.
Yeah.
I probably wasn't as specific with those as either action items or, like I said, more regular board meeting superintendent items.
Yeah.
Purposely trying to stay vague to where you can keep it all open.
Right, I mean, I guess part of that was, and maybe it is just WSB development on board governance and board superintendent relations would have been more specific than what I did.
Yeah, and you certainly could have said, you know, something like that, the focus will be, you
Like
know,
meeting-
general school operations, board governance, legal considerations, including open meetings laws, public comments, those types of things. So, I mean, you certainly could have been more specific, but I tend not to try to second guess folks. It's,
Right,
Yeah.
and for me, like, again, in this, I still don't get it right either, but I always try to look at it like, you know, would my neighbor know
Yeah.
what this means, right? And that's kind of the litmus test that I try to go through.
yeah, and that is, I mean, generally speaking, that is kind of the test of if just random community member sees that, are they going to have some kind of reasonable understanding of what's happening? So, generally speaking, more specificity is going to make it so that random folks out in the community understand what's happening.
Thank you.
All right. Any more questions?
Got any questions, Brad?
He's saving them, he's gonna email me tomorrow.
Well, and that's fine, because that's my last set of slides here. Did you give me it all?
Oh, that's fine.
Okay. I
Keep
was
it
gonna
going
say,
for
did
you.
I, thank you, did I lose it already? That's always my biggest fear. I'm gonna hide it and forget where I put it. So this last kind of roundup then is talking about, as you move forward, the teamwork piece of this. Because we can talk all day about guidelines and rules and laws, and it's gray. There's a lot of gray stuff. I mean, you saw tonight with those things, and again, the bottom line was make sure the wording is something everybody understands, a consensus understanding. That requires the teamwork and trusting each other. So this last little piece is delving into a little touch of that. And certainly if at another time you want to have another meeting about team development and we focus a little bit more on that, we can do that. But I'm just going to give you some food for thought, okay? And before I start with that, this is the newest version of the key work for school boards that has those 5 main areas of staff or board member development in terms of what you can do to work as a board. So, all right, so guiding concept about boards as teams. And that quote, the demeanor of the board has a powerful impact on the morale of the staff and their ability to carry out the board's decisions. That last slide in that other part about hanging on and if dividing, you know, we all know that. We all, with little kids, if we, you know, the divide and conquer, if mom says no, well then I'll run to dad kind of thing. As a board, you need to work as a unified team and trust and respect each other too. Because your demeanor and how you act here does filter out as leaders of the district, filters out amongst the staff and the community too. So your behavior as a group impacts lots of people, okay? And that is coming out of this book, which is another one that if you wanted to do a board, just read and study. This is something that is very good in terms of board work together. So, rising to the occasion, and I kind of narrowed down what this whole book was about when you're coming to the board meeting and having your mindset and your expectations about how to make this meeting as functional for all of you as possible. More of the people interaction instead of just the legal piece. So being prepared, used to always kind of, used to be a joke about how people would come to the board meetings when it was all paper and literally open them up at the board meeting. Once or twice, people kind of thought, well, we know people are busy, but there were people sometimes that 6, 7, 8 months, they would come and be opening up their packet at the board meeting. So that's not fair to your team members. It doesn't allow you to be a good participant in discussions. So being prepared is really important. Positive when addressing, we talked about demeanor in that last slide in terms of conversations being respectful. We can agree to disagree. That's a piece that's kind of missing when we talk about some of the board meetings across the state where people literally have to go to safe places. It's hard right now sometimes in some settings to keep that patience and be respectful, but it's important. Being a team player. Going back to that social media thing, there's a little caveat, and I'm not going to get into the whole about a legal piece, but I always think about as a board member, there is protection for you in saying, I'm a member of a board. I alone can't speak for my team. We speak at the board meeting together, and we make those decisions. So when you're out making comments on your own, that's where you get into a little bit of that piece of not being remembering that you're not an individual board member, you're a member of a board. So rising to the occasion, being fair and objective, looking at the facts when you make your decisions, being honest, but then also listening, and maybe somebody does have a point that you're not hearing because you're not really listening. So conversation is about listening. Confidentiality, Scott talked about. Nothing ruins the trust in a board team, of a team of any kind, more than breaking that confidentiality. And one other comment about that is that, sometimes people kind of needle or pick or try to hint around, and maybe they think it's great that, I found this little piece of information that nobody else knows. But it ruins your own reputation as an individual board member, because the next situation might involve that person, and now they're not going to be able to, because, hey, you told them about so-and-so's situation. Now it's them that they're the ones looking for confidentiality, and it destroys that piece of trust. So there are consequences beyond when you're looking at confidentiality. And being true to your own norms. Talked about policies. Sometimes, policies were made a while ago, they're still there, and they're still the guidelines until they're changed. So sticking to those rules of the road. Not taking things personally. Supporting your decisions, and then making sure accurate information is out there. And then, to me, the biggest thing is our kids are watching. We're streaming these board meetings now. We didn't do so many things out and have that ability to get it out. Your behavior here is setting that model for the kids too. So it is important for the boards to be respectful. And then, I'm not going to take this time other than just in your own mind right now. Think of a leader that you've worked with in any other situation who left a positive legacy. When they left, people are like, oh no, what are we going to do without that person? Think about how they behaved, how they did their job, and what words would you use to describe that leadership, and then emulating that and setting it as a goal for yourself. So, conflict, I mentioned before, it's going to be there. That's why there's a board. That's why there's 7 people, to have multiple opinions. So using those differences as an opportunity, being creative and finding a middle ground, or having those discussions, and then decide, once the decision is made, supporting it. So, conflict management tips, they're listed in your And again, we could do a whole workshop on having how to think and work through when there's difficulties. But if I had to pick one, it's that listen, listen, listen. That's the one that helps the most, is just taking the time to listen to that other opinion. And then this next slide goes with this verbal and nonverbal. Okay, it's not just your words, it's, again, how you're responding. I find this just totally fascinating that George Washington had some rules that he was promoting about behavior at public meetings. Not shaking the head or feet, not rolling your eyes, one eyebrow higher than the other, turning your back when somebody's talking, which is no different than just looking down, speaking injurious words, and then if they're not there, that they're fair game for having more complaints about them? No. So people are people. People have always been people. It's rising to that occasion and being the best person you can be. And no one creates success alone. We are better together. That's how we accomplish great things. So keeping that in mind. So my last point here, and I won't take the time to have you, share, but even if you wrote down a note to yourself, from what Scott talked to you about tonight, maybe something you learned, something about this last little section with working as a team, some pieces out of what makes a good school board. If you can think of something that you personally will commit and make a promise to yourself, that as a board member this year, this is what I will work to improve on and do better on. And again, if you put it here or you put it in writing, depending on your personality, what works for you, but just thinking about what you can do to make this the best governance team around. Okay? Are there any questions? Well, big thank you, Scott and I, for your time and your attention. That we've gone a little over the 2 hours, but and again, our contact information is provided at the end. And we thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, appreciate it.
Why is that back here?
It's cool.
Everything's relative.
Everything's
relative.
Maybe that's it.
At work, it works.
Yeah,
One
just
last
call if
hurrah.
there's anything else.
Yeah, have a good day.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care. Yeah.
Agree with it, but I'm like, amending it.
Yeah, that's-
You're interrupting.
In our hour, well, I like 16. You gotta have it subdivided, so.
I could take that. I could take the 75.
We burn wood and all that. They walk around and no, literally.
Thanks, Ed.
I'll tell you more. No, it's.
Like worse. My goals feel better. But
Thanks, everyone.
thank
Thank
you.
you.
Good night.
Have a safe drive.
Lunch
drive.
for deer.
Oh my gosh.
That's a whole barrel.
Holy buckets. You did that today.
Yeah.
Well done.
Good job.
Yes.
It's a good idea. Let me take a break and go back.
Yeah. Maybe
Want a brief
take a quick
recess?
break. Yeah.
I think we got it.
Break till next meeting.
You just gotta sleep in tomorrow.
I don't sleep in. 4:30 comes way too early.
Yes. It's so cool.
I wore my clothes.
Moving on.
Moving on.
You got your worker.
So I'd like to, this presentation is a lot of what Missy had done with our admin team. Talk just a little bit about the DPI report cards, which were released on November 16th. I had emailed the board about not only the district exceeding expectations, but all of our buildings exceeding expectations. So that's something that we've been working at for quite a while, and we were pretty happy about that. But part of it is just to understand a little bit of what is behind that and what does that look like. So you'll have links to these slides. Some of this is just at a glance. These look different. If you go on the DPI website to prior years, things will look very different. But part of it is, this top is our district information. I mean, this one isn't because it's their sample, but how many students do we have with disabilities? How many are economically disadvantaged? And then the priority area weight. So we have achievement, growth, target group outcomes, on track to graduation. And you'll look on the bottom. For the target group outcomes, and on track to graduation are going to always be kind of that, making up 50%. Now this one got bigger. So I will, yes, as an example, so when you look at it for us, and I'm talking about the one for the whole district, ours talks about achievement is 0.4%, growth is 33.6%. So our growth counts more than our achievement. All of that is connected to how many students you have that are economically disadvantaged. So as an example, I just pulled some districts that are different. So if you look at Abbotsford, for example, which is a very high economically disadvantaged district, their growth is 45% and their achievement is only 5%. So very different, and those weights don't typically change just because you're economically disadvantaged, don't typically change. Something more middle of the road is a Sun Prairie at like a 30%. So their achievement counts a little bit more. And then Whitefish Bay is the complete opposite. It's almost all achievement and a little bit of growth. So just so that you see that we compare district to district, but when you look at what's kind of in the guts behind things, it is different when we think about that.
And
And
some
the-
of it's, oh, sorry, go
Go
ahead.
ahead.
The three things that determine the change in that pie chart are the disabilities, economically disadvantaged, and English learners?
Just economically disadvantaged.
Just economics.
So that's why you'll see less economically disadvantaged, like a Whitefish Bay has really high just achievement. That counts heavy for them. Versus an Abbotsford, which has a 68.2% economically disadvantaged, a lot of what counts for them is growth.
Do you know the logic behind that?
I mean,
Whitefish Bay is
That's the question.
Why?
I mean, the idea is,
Yeah.
some of it I think has come about because that the more economically disadvantaged students you have, because if you remember, growth kind of counts, even if we didn't get proficient, and you'll see it when you look at ours,
Right.
if they grew more than we expected, we still get kind of credit for that. So that's sort of the theory behind it.
So they anticipate that districts that have more economic disadvantage are gonna start lower but should be able to grow?
Right, and then it gives you a chance to get credit for students that
For some,
grow,
yeah.
even if they aren't quite yet proficient.
So,
Alright.
for us to get an even better score, overall score,
Mhm.
we have to really focus on our growth, which is somewhat hard, right? Like, we're at a fairly high growth already. Like, how do you get that much more growth when it represents that much of your grade?
Or just maintain our growth, maybe.
Well, I think it is, some of it is that, I wanna
Yeah. that's a
open
lot.
up the district one.
I'm just trying to understand, like, as we
Yes.
try to set future goals, right? To understand, like, what's truly attainable based on kind of how some of these,
So when you look at our growth, like this bar here, the top one is us, and the underneath one is state, English, language, arts, and math, versus our achievement. So what we talk about is, like when we talk about all the things with having more kids successful with the universal curriculum, that's gonna help our achievement, which is still gonna help us. But when we look at our growth, there still is room to grow there. If you look at, on your handout, it's page. Back, one, two,
Page 3.
yeah, it's like the third page.
For achievement or growth.
So when you look at growth,
Page
you'll see what the other thing is, that sometimes people misunderstand is they think growth is just for low kids. Growth is for everybody. And so what they do is they'll say for all of your students, and then here they also break them out by categories. So the most points you could ever get in growth is 6. I don't know of a district that gets 6. Some can get pretty close. 3 is like average. So 3 is, I am a white 4th grade female who doesn't have a disability and is not economically disadvantaged. How much growth should I have from 3rd grade to 4th grade? And then they'll look at, what did I actually do from 3rd grade to 4th grade? Did I go above that, or did I not quite make it? So if I hit it exactly, I'm a 3. If I'm a little higher, so now, if you would have looked at, if you go back to DPI and look at our prior report card, we have a lot of those numbers to the left of that divide. Because one of the things you'll see is we are growing kids, but not enough yet to get them into proficient. So that'll continue. The other thing though that they do look is what's the expectation? So if I'm a student who's performing at the 98th percentile, my growth expectation isn't gonna be as high, because that's harder to eke out. So it is pretty complicated, but that's how they calculate that. So we will still have opportunities to help students grow that way. I don't know, Missy, is there anything that you want to add that you think I missed?
No, and I think the other major area to have an impact in terms of how we're gonna show continued improvement is by focusing on that achievement coupled with growth. So both of those things are gonna move us forward
Yes.
more quickly.
So I got a question.
Yep.
All this stuff means more to you guys than me. Our goal is to be significantly exceeding expectation in, was it 5 years or?
Actually, our goal was, on the strategic plan, was to exceed expectations. Because we were meeting expectations
So
as a district.
But in 5 years, we just wanted to exceed or significantly exceed?
What we had in our plan was to exceed.
Okay. So I'm speechless.
Sorry.
But we want to increase, so do we have plans on what we want to increase to and how we're going to get there? Because you guys obviously know how to digest all this
Correct.
stuff.
So, I mean, but I guess the longer answer to your question is, it's not like, oh, now we exceed expectations, so, you know, good for us, we're done.
Continue that.
And I will say, I mean, the part of the benefit of this is for people who have been working hard to see some payback for their efforts, makes them more motivated to now, so what can we do to significantly exceed expectations? So that's part of what we talk about is, like Missy said, looking at, for us, it's the achievement and the growth. It's also target group outcomes. I mean, it's everything, but those are the areas where if we continue on the path that we are, we'll get some bang for our buck. And that doesn't mean, I mean, that's what we would want to do, is to significantly exceed expectations.
Okay, and because so for some reason I thought it was to significantly exceed, because isn't there a stipend for everybody if we hit that number?
There is for this as well. Well, there is for certified staff in the handbook. That was in there, like, I don't know, it's been there.
For
quite
exceeds
some
or
time.
for significant?
exceeds.
Okay, and significantly
And
exceed.
significantly
And
exceeds.
it's bigger for
Yes.
the other one. So for our goals, are we gonna up it to significantly exceeds in 5 years and put a number towards that, or how do we look at that?
I mean, I guess that's something for the board to talk about. I'm hesitant to kind of redo a whole strategic plan that we just did.
5 years, Brad.
That doesn't mean
Got it
that
done in a
that's
year, we're
not
done.
Yes.
Well,
something
Yeah.
that we're working
Well,
on, you know, and that we have a drive for. Because remember, we were a district that had buildings that had failed and then met few expectations. So we have a building that went from meeting few expectations to exceeding. That, you know, as you know, once you make some jumps, the next jumps are sometimes a little bit harder to do, the higher you go. But that doesn't, again, mean that's all of the, if you remember the strategic plan, the overarching piece is continuous improvement.
Correct.
So even though our goal on there around the DPI report card was to exceed expectations, and we've done that, our goal now will be to still improve our score and at some point to significantly exceed expectations. So like the cutoff for that is gonna be a score of 83.
Okay, because yeah, it was, well, a couple of years ago, it was 4%, right? Maybe we can't hit 4% right now, but that's, I guess, when do we come back and revisit? Like, what is our goal for this year?
So I think what the board would wanna think about is, because one of the things we've talked about, and I feel like we kind of, to think about the best way to direct that is because that would be like our annual scorecard.
Right.
But we did kind of make a decision, honestly, because of the timing of our state test scores and the DPI report card release, which is November, to kind of switch to our FastBridge scores on our annual scorecard. So that's what we're using. And again, it carries that assumption that there's alignment that we're still tracking data on. So I mean, I think that's something for the board to think about, because the hard part for us is then it moves your whole annual scorecard back into, honestly, almost December.
This is what we want to do, right? Because ultimately this is the ultimate measure of our district and what everybody sees. So we've been going off of the DPI and the state testing. The other testing has just been what we've been trying to do as a benchmark to see if we're going to hit this or not.
Correct, so that's why that's like the annual scorecard. So the strategic plan, which talks about the exceeding expectations, so that's like our 5-year plan.
Yep.
Then that breaks into annual 1-year plans.
Right.
And it's been the 1-year plans for the last couple of years that we have used FastBridge scores when we talk about student achievement. I mean, the other tricky piece is that you don't, like, to do predictions of growth in a short cycle type of thing is really difficult, because we don't have the analysis for each student to do that level of prediction like this. I mean, that's through University of Madison.
Yep.
So we know things that impact that, and those are more like our strategic actions, but we don't have like a short cycle piece of that, because we don't have a way to accurately predict that for every student, giving all of their demographic information.
Okay.
And we're never gonna have that before November every year.
And even
This
the
information.
technical
Right, so.
expertise around that,
Right.
you know, because like I said, that's all what they call value added, which takes all of those pieces into consideration, where they kind of do that. But, you know, so when we look at, I mean, part of it is, as we do more FastBridge and more alignment, FastBridge aligns, what we've aligned it with is achievement. So achievement is how do kids do on state tests, and how many are proficient. Really, that's that left circle, kind of right here. How many are proficient or advanced, and how many are not. Growth, though, will say, you know what, I was a basic, and I'm not proficient yet, but I gained enough points that I'm one of those boxes to the right in growth. So I'm still not proficient, but I grew quite a bit. I grew more than you would expect.
What's really weird about this, though, is that, so we're growing people, which is good, and we've clearly got to grow them more yet, because we've got to get the achievement up. But at some point, we're going to get the achievement up, which counts for less, and the growth will stop because you can't grow
And
anymore.
we'll go down.
And our actual DPI will go down, even though our education has gone significantly up.
Well, and I think, I mean, that's part of what makes it a little bit complicated, because of the priority area weights.
Right, because
And
achievement.
especially when people look at one district to another.
Right, because I mean, I've shared these with you. I mean, I chart
Yes.
all this, and the overall looks really good. The achievement looks awful, but it's also the lesser part of the grade, right? So it's really confusing to figure out which one you should focus on. But obviously, achievement's super important, because that's how much the kids have learned.
Well, and I would say, I mean, the one benefit for us is the strategies that we use impact both. When the
Right.
things that we're doing with cooperative learning will
Right.
impact both. The things, you
Well,
know.
the only way to get the achievement up is to continue growth.
Right.
So, I mean, they're gonna be directly correlated. So for the next couple of years, we've definitely got a lot of room to push those scores, which is good.
So, I mean, I think that's when we start to look at the impact that we're having. And when, for example, in November, in service, that's what staff kind of dug into is what were students looking like in some of the public data, and then in some of the data we get on, for example, in math, what are 8th grade strands that we're stronger in, what are some strands that we're weaker in, and how can we impact that?
Jim, you did say though, as our achievement improves, our growth expectations will go down, right? So if we have higher achievers, meeting the growth requirements won't be as high.
Correct.
So technically, if we are achieving higher,
It'll
It
float
should
over, yeah.
still
be
should be
excelling.
getting good growth.
yeah,
Right.
because they won't be expecting as much growth because we're
Correct.
already at
'Cause
starting higher.
Your growth is the one thing that is factored to sort of all of your personal
You guys are the ones
characteristics.
who are supposed to know all that. It's not me.
Yeah, can you guys
Just
So-
tell me how we're gonna
We're
get to
level up.
You guys are
like.
like, seriously, you're taking a while to get this, right?
Just tell us how we're gonna get to 80. So how are we gonna be the best district in the small school district in the state of Wisconsin?
Just
That's
so
what I
you
want
know,
to know.
Not long ago, we were in your same place. 'Cause
So-
Yeah, you
some
could
of
probably
the stuff
help-
is new.
Yeah.
Help us
I
get
guess
there
the only
faster.
thing I want to see is we did a great job. That's a great score. We pat ourselves on the back, but we keep moving forward because anything less than moving forward is a bummer after having a great number. So we want to go
Right.
forward. We got to establish that number we want to hit. We have all the right people in this room to say how we're going to get that number to move forward. So, like, how are we going to move forward, and what's that number look like for
So
next
you
year?
would like to set an annual goal for the DPI report card?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what we had in the past, right? Like, we had a 4% increase. I don't know, 4%.
That was a couple, so
Two
we haven't for a
couple-
couple of years just because of
Yeah.
the November
Yeah.
timeline. So I think people, that's what you should share. So the idea, what we've done the last couple of years is set our goals at the factors that impact the DPI report card that we feel like, go back
Because
forward.
last year we never got one, right?
Correct.
So then.
But
the-
this includes, so for
Yeah.
example, the growth on this one, they call it skip year, it includes 2 years.
I don't know what everybody else wants to see, but I guess I thought that was this is the big goal, is that number. And then how
Right.
do we keep going forward and moving forward with that number? Like, Stanley's still doing better than us, not that I want to,
Well,
but how do we do better than them, and how do we become the best small school district in the
I
state?
think we're definitely headed the right direction.
But yeah, we're doing great. I guess sitting
think-
here is just how do you guys keep moving forward, and what is that number we want to hit for next year? Because I don't want to say, hey, well, let's just hit 74.8 again. I mean, which is great, but if we're continuously improving, we should be setting new goals, higher goals.
I think
and
like what Jenny
does that
said
look
too,
like?
though, is at this point, they work so hard to get here. I think we're gonna just see all the self-driven movement from here too. Not that we should let up or not set a new goal or have something to reach, but I
Right.
think that we're gonna be impressed with a lot of self-driven people at this point to keep going forward, because they've seen what we could accomplish. That's a very encouraging thing.
I think some of the things that you mentioned about in service and identifying some of those areas that need to work too, I think that's where you make your real inroads in the long run, is identifying those weak areas.
Well, and I think to kind of Brad's question, so how are we gonna get there? Those are action steps that we've talked about, and with, again, kind of the instructional strategies and the tracking the assessment success on summatives and all of those. The related question you have is, so what's our new score gonna be that we strive for?
Mhm.
It's a little bit tricky, and DPI will tell you shouldn't, track year to year, but everybody does, and that's how they present it. I mean, statistically, because we had a bigger jump. Can't talk and click at the same time. I mean, kind of similar to what I said before, as you get higher, I don't know that we can always do 4%, 4%,
Right,
4%,
I get
because
that.
it's gonna get harder.
Yep.
So I mean, again, now this was a big jump for us, but part of it is, remember, they changed how they did a bunch of the calculations. So just because we went from 67.4 to 74.8, it'd be like, oh, well then we should, see an 8-point gain or a 6-point gain.
Right.
Now the expectations will be the same again, I think we can have a goal for that. The tricky part is there isn't really a statistical way to say what's the best goal. It would be just saying, based on what we're striving to do, here's what we think would be achievable.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. I mean,
Yeah.
things have changed a little bit, but here we are. We want to be better. And I mean, there still significantly exceeds expectations, which is out there.
Mhm.
And I mean, it doesn't mean we're going to get there in 5 years, but it doesn't have to be a 4% gain.
Right.
Because once we start closing the gap, it's going to get tougher.
Right.
But we
Mhm.
still should be
Still wanna see
shooting
a
for
gain.
something. Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, if we're not trying to get better, we're not improving.
My question, to answer your question about having that score be on our strategic plan, is that, or even our annual scorecard, is the difficulty is how do we add that now, and then we won't know.
We've done that every year, though.
You've added it in the middle of the year?
Every year we wait because we don't get our scores until now to add that to see what our new goal is going to be.
But not for the strategic plan.
We didn't on the
Not for
strategic plan. I'm
strategic
talking the
plan, but
strategic
for
plan.
annual
The
goals. I
5
mean,
year, the 5 years, like, that shift, I guess. I don't know how to say that, right? Like, we can't change that. But
No.
that doesn't mean that we can't still set a yearly goal above
Right.
the
yeah,
5-year plan.
yeah. The strategic
The
plan is the
scorecard.
strategic plan, I guess, unless we want to go do. No, we don't.
The annual-
Mhm.
But our annual, year over year, like that's
So
where
there would just
we
be-
need to set that still.
There'd just be
And-
one category that we can't really assess if we met it until this time next year.
Correct.
For this
Every-
year.
every
So it's
year.
just gonna be a goofy little outlier of a
Yeah, you
section.
are correct.
Right, so just as an example, these are the last couple of years.
Yeah.
We did, this is the 2020 to 2021, so last school year, we did, that's where we kind of switched, so we had, even instead of state testing, we did the Fast Bridge. And I was gonna look at the year before. 2019 to 20,
Right. We switched last year because we knew we weren't going to have one of these.
'Cause it wasn't
DPI.
available.
Yes.
that was when, we had talked about that 4% increase.
I'm not trying to drag this meeting on, I guess.
No.
Whatever that is, and then when we come back for next time, we should establish that goal, and then you guys.
I mean, so if the board is thinking that's what they wanna add to the annual scorecard, cause we could do that at our December regular meeting would be when we would do that, cause it'd have to get approved. Cause we already approved our annual scorecard, we would be just amending it, I guess.
The problem I think that you have with, and again, I want to be clear, I'm completely on board with setting a new goal annually. But it's really difficult, I think, to say, even like, say 4 points, because when you look at the achievement, we actually went a little bit backwards on some of this stuff from a standpoint of like, the charts got taller from the orange and the yellow, which is not what you want. You want to be going the other way a little bit. And so we have a lot of room to move for achievement, but that's also then a direct correlation to what the growth is. And the weights in which they play in your actual report card are smaller, right? So we have the most to gain in achievement, but that's gonna factor out because of the percentage that it plays. And I wanna be careful about setting a goal on a number, because it's kinda like setting, I always tell people, like, when you own a company, you can set a goal and for the bonuses, and they'll gladly bankrupt you to make their bonus, right? And so I feel like if we set that number, we might focus in the wrong area, and so it would be detrimental to the students just to get this higher. Like, getting a better score might not necessarily mean we did a better job. Like, I know that's a weird statement, but that's what I kind of, the way these numbers play out, I feel like that could happen.
Well, I think it does. The other thing to remember is because all of your state test scores stay in for 3 years. So it isn't, I mean, that's partly why they do that, so you aren't kind of like up, down.
Right.
That there's more stability, that's kind of designed to try to be more stable.
Right, I mean, if I were to look at one piece of this, it's weird, like, the least critical piece of our report card, I look at as being the most important measurement we have, right? I mean, am I wrong in that? Am I seeing that wrong? Right, because achievement is like where people are, proficient, advanced, basic, and below basic. That seems pretty important to me, because these are the individuals that are gonna graduate, and okay, yeah, they're on target to graduate, but they're, below basic, right? Like, that's not great, but that's the smallest part of our report card. And so I struggle with figuring out, like, sure, we want to get everybody to graduate, but wouldn't it be nice if they were all proficient? I mean, I know that's not realistic either, but
Right.
But it feels like we're doing a disservice if we focus on these other bigger areas, while the achievement feels like individually to the students, as a whole for the school looks great, but individually, we're definitely leaving students behind.
So how would we measure how our school district is doing if we don't use this, like we always have?
Well, I'm not saying we don't use this, I'm just saying I want to be careful that when we start prioritizing the actual on-the-ground movements, right, that they don't distract from the individuals of the students as well, I guess I'll say. I mean,
I feel like a lot of what has happened here with our achievement is what we have all heard of and talked about years ago of closing the gaps. I think that's a big part of what they've been able to accomplish here, is they're really closing the gaps that we've had in the past in the district. And I think, well, maybe they get the gaps closed, and now moving forward with the new teaching strategies and stuff that they're doing, I think they'll, now gaps get closed, now everybody start getting drugged forward higher,
Well, I think, kind of with Corey's example of what could happen is, so let's say this 56.9, we move that to, 57 something. That could go up, and this could either stay the same or go down a little bit, just the way the formula is. That's possible. And so I think, I don't want to overthink it too much, because part of it is we're trying to make all of them go up. We aren't necessarily trying to game it that way, but we are trying to, every time you move a student into another category, so from below basic to basic, they give you, that's a half a point. If you move from proficient to advanced, that's a 1.5. So we do look at who's really close, and can we bump them up, and can we make sure they don't bump down? Those are things we look at when we look at kind of student outcomes. So I think it's fine that we could set a goal for that. It'll be the benchmarking along the way that's gonna be the trickier part.
So the benchmarking is how we know we're sort of doing the right thing, right? And that's for you guys to basically say, we're benchmarking and we're on target. We're just as good or we're better than last year, right? Or we're falling a little behind and we gotta scoot things up a little bit. And that's what we're doing all this other stuff for. And then at the end of the year we get this number and it says, woohoo, right? All that benchmarking we're doing the right thing. So, and that's where this is great. I'm super pumped. Everybody's super pumped. But then, what does this look like for next year? And the 5-year plan may be a shot, but ultimately have to improve. So where can we be next year? Like where you guys are going to pick the areas we're going to improve on, but what's that number going to be next year? Is it going to be 77? Never 75? And then.
Well,
and I'll just say the trickiest part is the thing we don't really have a good benchmarking ability on is the growth, and that's weighted heavier.
The problem is going to be and again,
we can benchmark the achievement better.
If I pull up my stats prediction hat on this, and then we just go from 2016, which was our lowest, through 2021, and I draw a mean line straight through this, we're actually predicted to go down next year, not up, because we had a significant bump this year, which was unexpected. If you look at the little chart, we're the blue ones, right? So if you draw a straight line through that, statistically, we're going to go down next year. Now, I'm not saying that's going to happen, but I just want to be careful that we don't set a goal even higher and then come, 8 points lower on top of it, because we're looking for a steady growth, right? And we had a really big bump for whatever reason, and if that bump continues, that's really definitely cause for celebration, because if we continue on this trajectory, we'll definitely be at 80 next year. Right. If you look at just the 1 year gap.
And I don't know that we will.
Feels like an outlier.
It is, especially the level of growth is, just because of how they are really taking different components.
Right.
And especially that target group outcomes is different than it used to be.
Right. And I guess what I'm trying to say is even if we dropped next year,
Mhm.
statistically, we're still moving forward up. Like, we're still actually going forward, even though we dropped back.
Well, I guess,
What?
to your point, looking at this, would you guys be okay setting, instead of the DPI report card, we were talking about achievement, you know, could we set something to say our achievement levels? Because in the end, that's what we're looking for, like you said, to.
It does feel like we have the most work there, right? I mean, again, you've looked at these a lot deeper than I have, but I guess if you were to say what would be the most beneficial to the student body?
That's, I mean, part of it for us, and I think it's just from it's not really common sense, but from a general idea, you think, we want more kids proficient than not. How can we move that? And that's sort of how we got to when we did the annual scorecard using the FastBridge. And we did go to FastBridge from the state test, just because FastBridge we get right away. State test students take in April-ish, and we find out in July. So by then they're gone. So I just kind of talked full circle with all of that, but that's kind of how we ended up with that on there in the first place.
That's why achievement is the focus via FastBridge scores.
Right.
Achievement, yeah, and all this is important, but ultimately that score is what our customers and everybody sees and judges us on. So that's kind of where we've said we want to increase by 4%, or we want to look better in the eyes of the people who are judging us, basically, right? Because people are going to move in the district, and the first thing they do is pull DPI up, and they see now they see we're 74.8, and they're like, hey, that's a pretty good district. I mean, that's what they look at.
I'm hoping that's not the only reason that they pick.
That's right.
But that's a
pick it up,
lot. That's a lot of the
though.
reason
I
why
don't think
when they move in, if they see you are not meeting expectations, that's what people look at.
I agree, but I think we understand those numbers more than that, and we understand that whether we go up or down doesn't necessarily mean our district is achieving or not achieving, or, you know, we understand what's going on behind the scenes with all that. So I'm not saying that that's not true, but that doesn't mean we have to put all of our weight behind it either, because there's a lot more to it than that.
It's one of the tools we have to make a student successful. Right. And I think some of the other goals that we've set for our students here we have to take that in consideration too, I think.
I'm okay with having it as a separate goal, but I agree if we want to focus on achievement, I think the FastBridge scores show that achievement multiple times throughout the year, and we have that data readily available. I think that makes sense.
And I think that helps
But those
Well, we
FastBridge
Right,
scores
so-
that we've been
yeah.
using have never been anything that we've relied on other than to help everybody make tweaks.
Right, but what else
To
do
learn
we
which
have?
direction we're going. That we make tweaks on FastBridge to help improve this in a way, right?
Right.
And I could be wrong. Is that what you guys are doing? Because we do FastBridge so we can tweak it and see where we need to improve. But really, those aren't our goals. That's just it's like our quarterly measuring
Like a
tool to
checkup.
see where we're going to
Yep.
do. So when we come in at the end of the year, we're moving forward.
Right.
I don't.
So I'm hearing that maybe what we would do at December is add an agenda item where we look at an additional goal, because we do have FastBridge as
I
our
thought we
annual
had
scorecard.
that in the top spot, but we were just waiting for this number to come back
We didn't, but we can,
in our goals.
that was, I mean, we did in that prior one. Sorry, I got too many things open, but. So this is the annual scorecard that we did. So remember, these are the goals.
Yep. So it was to improve the state report card, but we didn't know where we were going to be, so we were going to assess once we got that report card, because in the past,
Correct.
it was 4%.
From the 2021 results.
Yes.
So we just said we were gonna improve, but we didn't, but I mean, that was,
So we have to set a goal for this year saying, this is where we're at, and this is where we want to be for next year, correct?
okay.
Or no?
Well, we did say we would exceed expectations.
By
On
2023.
2023.
Right, that,
Yeah, and we want to continue to exceed expectations, whatever that number is at. I don't know where the cutoff is.
83, so I mean,
Yeah.
it's a pretty high benchmark to
Yeah.
significantly exceed. Again, doable,
Is it accomplishable?
districts do it,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Heck yeah. Can we do it,
not
Caleb?
As many, but part of that is too, as you get into the, and I think when people look, they look at kind of the descriptor as much of, and maybe they do, I mean, I understand if I'm looking between 3 districts and somebody's a 74 and somebody's a 75 and somebody's a 73, maybe that doesn't matter, but if somebody's a 74 and somebody's a 60, that might matter to me. So I would plan for December then that we would look at adding a piece here. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it might not be 4%. It might be the same exact
I
thing
don't-
for you guys, depending on how we feel comfortable. It could be a 0.5% growth.
Yeah.
Well,
I don't
Something
know.
we can all think about for.
Yeah, give us an idea.
For-
Yeah.
of what it would be and-
Well, just for reference to, starting in 2016, we've only gone 2 to 2.5 points per year, right? And then suddenly we jumped almost 7 points, right? So
That's
I
what
mean,
I'm- like,
I'm
this
trying to
isn't-
keep everybody realistic, right? Like, I mean, as much as I want us to jump another 7 points, this was a big jump, and we should be very happy about that. But, I don't know if it's realistic to think we're gonna jump 5 or 6 points again.
Well, and again, because part of that jump was due to a whole yes, we had some improvements, but there was also a reconfiguration in how things were weighted
Right.
and how they calculated growth is what helped us more than anything else.
Right. And if we look at neighboring districts too, like we're on an upward trajectory where everybody else is on a downward trajectory now. When you look at a state report card, you don't see that, and that frustrates me that literally that front page of that report card isn't at least the last 5 years for every district. Like that is so important because we paint a fantastic picture, even though we're a lower score than a neighboring district, and their picture isn't so great, right? So that's a little misleading from a DPI report card standpoint.
Jenny, there's no way to know what our score would have been on the 2019 calculation.
No.
We tried to do that a little bit with Fast Bridge, but it was so new, right?
Right, and then, like I said,
No,
now,
but would it be
because
this
part of
year?
it is
Like,
because of
what
that
would we
growth
get
piece.
If
There-
that hadn't,
Oh,
if they hadn't changed that, what we would, just to kind of compare a little bit.
Yeah, there really isn't, because even that had some of the value-added pieces in it.
I mean,
Okay.
what you're saying is, let's not sit on our laurels, right? You're saying, we're crushing it, let's keep crushing it, and I think
Well,
everybody agrees with that.
some type of progression, yeah.
Yes.
I mean, it doesn't have to be 4, it can be 2% or 1%, and then when you guys analyze this, because you guys are the experts, you're gonna know the areas where we can grow, and if there's lots of basics and we move to that proficient, and that's the area to target.
I think that's the key, what you just
But,
said there, Brad.
Anyhow, for me, I have no clue other than the number and like what do we think we can achieve for next year.
And it is, I mean, like I said, for some of that, it will be a guessing game because of the weight given to growth.
Mhm.
That doesn't mean we wouldn't do
Bless
it.
you.
Right.
Sneezing.
Oh, we gotta talk about the goals.
So I will add that to December,
Just done. Yeah, that's
as we kind of already
Long
talked about.
timeline.
So target group outcomes, what that does is, it used to be if you had to have 20 in a group. So this is what has changed for some other districts, as far as if you didn't have, for example, 20 special ed students in your elementary, they didn't count at all for you. Now, it's your lowest 25%. As long as there's at least 20. So if a district is tiny enough that that's not 20 kids, then it still doesn't count. But for many districts, they didn't have that at all. Now they do. So, you'll see this is an area where, again, we have a long way to go. I mean, look at our scores. Now, this is our target group and our non-target group. So, yes, you expect that there's differentiation there because it's students who are, by definition, performing at the lowest levels. But our district, this is where our district kind of sits with all of the other districts in the state, and that's something that we're kind of proud of. And then this is kind of how they do it. So the bottom 25% of ELA, based on prior year's results, bottom 25% of math, and then the lower ELA math bottom 25%. And then the DLM is the assessment for students who are not able to take the regular assessment, which again is maybe only 1 or 2 students. So that target group gets decided kind of the year prior. I mean, that's part of, if any of you, and I can kind of resend, if you are interested in digging deeper in the CISA link, I mean, it's just part of what makes it difficult is it's very complex and it's complicated. You know, so even of this, if they're in this year's target group, then they take this year's results and their attendance, their graduation, and then what's their achievement, what's their growth, what's their chronic absenteeism, what's their attendance, and what's their graduation. So that's all just for that subset. And then on track to graduation, those have not changed as much from prior years. They look at 3rd grade ELA achievement, 8th grade math, attendance in elementary and junior high, graduation rate at the high school. The other thing that, as you see, is our junior high, even though it's in one building, is considered a separate building. And again, this is achievement, so this is all state testing for students in grades 3 through 11. So this is one where we said, just kind of like Corey talked about, we've got room to grow here when we look at our district compared to others. We just don't necessarily get as much bang for our buck in our score. And then the growth priority, this is one, again, this is part of what really pushed us, was the score we did this. How well did students do compared to how we predicted they would do, or how the state predicted they would do?
But this is a direct result of achievement though, right? Like
It is, so on their achievement, and it is compared to growth of similar students across the state. So I'm a 4th grade boy with a learning disability. What would you expect from me from 4th to 5th grade? I either went above that or below or hit it right on the head. And then they take all of those individual scores and compile them. And that's what looks like this. So you'll see for all students, if everybody hit it exactly on the head, you would get 3. So this is an area, and if you, as Corey talked about, if you went back to our prior report card, we had more scores over here and over here. We weren't, that's what was responsible for our biggest bump, is kids grew more than they were expected to.
And arguably that'll be a little bit harder next year, right?
Correct, because they did better, and I mean, again, yes, then the expectations get adjusted, but it's still, like anything, the higher you go, the harder it is to keep eking out
It's a moving
improvement.
target.
Doesn't mean you can't do it, it just doesn't come at the same pace. And this is just what I've talked about, kind of what's next, and the work that we're doing with staff. So, I will, like I said, again, I'll bring this to December to update the annual scorecard, but other questions, I can resend the video just in case people want to kind of do a digging deeper piece if that's something you're interested in.
This was very helpful.
It is very helpful.
Yeah.
And since we're live, I just want to go say you guys are doing a great job. I'm very proud of
It
you
is very
guys.
exciting.
So
I hope, was the staff
Yeah.
excited?
Yes, I mean, this, because, and I think that's, you know, we talk about what you think improvement looks like, this line that's like, we work harder, do better, 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 and what it really looks like is this, like a big squiggle mess, but as you talk about, your trend does improve. And for people to kind of see some reinforcement that being more narrow and focused is the right approach, and some of the development and work that they're doing. I mean, and it does take time. I mean, even when we talk about the cooperative learning strategies, you know, it isn't like, well, we had a training in August, so now that's gonna jump us 2 points. It's gonna take, they're gonna be coaching in February, there'll be more follow-up next fall. It's because it takes time for people to build those skills. And the other piece that I mentioned is to have an opportunity to celebrate. So one of the things we wanna do in January with our students is just, you know, we're getting some ice cream cups and some things to help them have some ownership in it as well, because One of the difficult things for all of these assessments is from a kid's perspective, it's completely low stakes, other than maybe the ACT. It has they don't get it until months after they take it. And unless it happens to matter to them, most, there just really isn't any connection that way. It's hard to do. So any other questions on that? So the facility update, this is more just a verbal update. We actually had 11 proposals. I did just sort of hand some around, only if you wanted to see, like, here's what they look like. You don't have to, you'll take time to dig deeper. What I've started to do is put them into a spreadsheet. We can scan them in so people can actually look. In general, this is what we were kind of looking at for a timeline. So these dates line up with board meetings. So they were all due on the 23rd. By the December meeting, we would have the overview of the comparisons available so that board members can kind of look through those. In our December committee of the whole, we give feedback on the proposals and talk about an interview process and questions. So the idea is we start with 11, we maybe have 3-ish that we say, these are our finalists, we want to interview these people. And then in January, we would do that, and then February, we would vote on our chosen vendor. So mostly just if that seems to generally,
Now, most of these have a fee, so.
all of them have a fee.
So how do we handle that? Like, so we would have to say we want 2 or 3 of these to do it, or we're just gonna finally just pick one to do it? and
We
then
would just pick one to
pick
do
one?
it. And so and we did say in our proposal, we aren't necessarily bound to go with the lowest bidder,
Right.
because it might depend, many of them you'll see have references in there, or even other references that we might check. Also, one of the things that I'm starting to put together in the spreadsheet is some of them structure their fees differently. So like our fee is $20,000, but if you use us for a project, we'll credit you $6,000 back.
Mhm.
And some are just, here's our fee, 10
Right,
grand or
right.
whatever it is.
Right.
So they're somewhat comparable, but somewhat not. And for anyone that asked, I said, give us your fee, assuming we're not gonna use you for follow-up, because we don't wanna be obligated to do that.
It's still pretty important we pick the right one, because I mean, if we have them do it, it's not like we can say, okay, well, we don't like your study, so we'll have somebody else just take it and run with it, right? You're
No.
gonna start all over again.
No. And I would say, I mean, most of them are, if not all of them, like some I'm more familiar with than others, just because of their location or work they've done in the past that I've known about, but, they're all vendors that work with schools.
I don't really know how the agenda works, but since we're talking about the FEMA, the grant thing, when we talk about this next, can you bring whatever information you find on
Sure.
whatever meeting?
And so I don't have anything from him
Right.
yet. So the question is kind of connected to the FEMA grant around the facility, I have safe haven in my head and that's not the right word. Safe structure. Right now, because the timeline on those is January, so he said he wouldn't be able to get it till probably in December sometime.
Oh, okay.
Part of what, the initial piece is even are we eligible?
Right.
Because it has to do with the population, because I feel like that's either, once that's yes or no,
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
we do more. But that would be part of, I mean, it's a little bit separate than this, but it would be part of what,
Yeah.
whoever our vendor is, they would consider
Okay.
that.
Do you have an idea of how we're gonna narrow it down?
I think, I mean, I will,
Ooh, I don't know.
there's recommendations, I will make some recommendations.
Okay, good.
But I wanna give you all the information.
We have a little bit of history with saw a few of these.
So that,
in the past.
you can have your opinions as well.
Are these gonna be just in your office for viewing, or is there a way to look at them besides just now?
Yeah, because only a couple, the printed ones I have electronically, but we'll scan them in and then I'll put them in a spreadsheet, so then everybody can see it.
Okay.
It'll just take us a little time to get it done.
So do your homework before you come.
Yes.
Well,
Sounds like a fun job, all that,
Can you
putting it into
do-
a spreadsheet.
do some columns for us, like?
Yes, I
here's
mean,
what they-
just to
here's
give
what
you
they
a very
provide,
quick,
here's what-
Yeah, a few pros
Is it
and
gonna be a
cons.
fee, flat fee, or a percentage, or is it gonna be,
you know, like,
you know,
that's what I started.
yeah,
Mhm.
okay.
But I mean, the
yeah,
comments is gonna be where it says,
yeah,
you know, this much is credited back, or some of them,
Right,
their fee doesn't specifically include whatever piece. So that part will be in the comments. And again, I mean, that's why the timeline is what it is though, so that it would be the December committee of the whole where we kind of give our feedback and kind of select our
Yeah,
interviewees.
interviews are a big deal too, I know when we did the elementary there, we did, that was,
Do you remember how many you interviewed then?
oh, so we did Margaret and Johnson and C.D. Smith, Brady, C.D. Smith, who was the other one?
We did CISA and we did Kraus, didn't we?
I think we had like 3 of them, I think.
Because that's what I would guess 3 to 4.
Yeah. And we had local people working on, as superintendent, still on 2 of the projects,
Mhm.
or could have been on 2 of the proposals there, which was good.
Yeah, so as soon as we have that ready, we'll share it out. Anything else on the facility? And not specifically, because.
All in favor of number 5?
Tucking the kids in.
Yeah, I forget that. You're on the board now, I
You know,
forget
like
that.
4 things
Probably
you
almost
get.
all.
They're big enough, they take care of themselves now.
I know.
You kids can read now, read
You
your
good,
own
Al?
story when you go to bed.
Yeah, I think so. Are you guys all?
You want a motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
I'll second.
Motion by Brad, second by Becca. All in favor?
Aye.
We're adjourned.
Thank you.
Nope, not tonight.
Spend a lot of money.
Shortest agenda, longest meeting.
Oh, yes, doesn't make sense.
No, me neither.
Sticking with us.
Absolutely.
Congratulations on your awesome achievement.
Still so
Can
cold.
only imagine how painful it is for you to sit there and watch us.
Okay, so that's hopefully a good fight.
Data.
No,
I don't want to
it's true, because you feel like you get it, and then all of a sudden.
Hey, you, very positive,
Then it's like,
positive thing.
lost the grasp.
Terry, very positive.
Agreed, well done, Caleb.
Nice.
For working